I still remember where the morning smelled that day. Damp earth and pine needles, sharp and clean, almost sweet if you ignore the wet decay underneath. It was supposed to be an ordinary hike. Just me and Jason, trudging up the trails we'd mapped out the week before, joking about how we'd conquer the wilderness and maybe scare ourselves a little. I should have felt excitement, maybe even some pride at being out there in the untouched forest. But I didn't. Not really. There was a weight in the air, though I didn't know how to name it at first. We parked at the trailhead just after sunrise. Mist was crawling along the treetops like fingers, stretching out to reach us, and I remember thinking, without knowing why, that the forest looked like it was breathing. Jason was already ahead, backpack slung low, talking about how the fog would make this hike epic for the photos. He laughed, a sound that was too loud in the quiet morning. I tried to laugh too, but it came out tight, like my throat was catching on something invisible. The trail started easy, winding between tall pines with a carpet of brown needles underfoot. Birds called somewhere high above us, though I couldn't see them through the mist. We kept a steady pace, but I noticed I was always slightly behind. Not because Jason was faster, he wasn't, but because I kept slowing down, looking around, looking for, I don't know what, shadows? Shapes? Something that didn't belong? The thought made me feel guilty, like I was doubting my own friend. By mid-morning, the fog thickened, settling low in the hollows. Every tree we passed seemed taller, older. I remember one moment. I glanced at a tree just to my left, and the bark looked almost wet with black streaks. I stopped and stared. "What's wrong?" Jason asked, turning back with his usual grin. He didn't see anything, of course. I shook my head. "Nothing," I said, though my voice sounded smaller than I intended. The trail split at a creek, and Jason wanted to take the path on the right. He insisted we'd loop around and meet the main trail again, promising a better view of the valley below. I hesitated. The other path seemed older, less traveled, almost like the forest had swallowed it and forgotten. Jason laughed at my hesitation, nudged me forward, and I followed. It wasn't long before the quiet started to press on me. The fog made everything muffled, but there was something else too, a low, constant sound I couldn't place at first. It wasn't the wind. Not really. It was almost like whispering, if you squinted hard enough and let your mind fill in the spaces. I told myself it was my imagination. Jason didn't hear it. He was too busy stepping over roots, pointing out moss patterns, and making jokes about how the forest looked like a painting. I stopped once near a bend in the trail. A large pine leaned over the path. Its trunk split in the middle like it had been struck by lightning long ago. There was a smell there, sharp, metallic, rusting. I froze, thinking I might have imagined it. Then Jason's voice called back to me, a little too casual. "Come on, man. You're making it worse than it is." But the voice sounded distant, even though he was only a few feet ahead. I caught up eventually, but I noticed something else. Footprints. They weren't ours. Not really. They were faint, almost swallowed by the pine needles, but they're deep enough that I could see the outline of shoes, maybe boots. I looked at Jason. He was walking normally, unaware. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing at the ground. "See what?" He smiled, brushing past it. "Just leaves. You're seeing things." But I wasn't. I swear I wasn't. I wanted to say more, to insist, but something in me held back. Fear, maybe, or maybe guilt. Something told me I shouldn't speak it aloud. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time felt wrong in that fog. The sun didn't seem to move. The forest didn't seem to change. We reached a small clearing, and for the first time, I saw the valley below. Mist was crawling over it, and everything looked washed out, unreal, like we had stepped into a painting where the colors hadn't dried. Jason took a photo, holding up his phone with the screen glowing in the dim light. "Perfect," he said. "This is going on the feed for sure." I wanted to smile. I really did. But the valley looked wrong to me. Not just gray and misty, but empty. Not empty in the normal sense. Empty as if it had swallowed life and was holding it somewhere else. I told myself I was being paranoid, and I laughed, but it sounded hollow. When we started back down the trail, I noticed the whispers again. Softer this time, almost like they were coming from the trees themselves. I turned my head sharply, expecting to catch Jason staring at the same thing. He wasn't. He walked ahead like the forest was nothing more than an annoying blur in the corner of his day. At some point, I realized I couldn't see him clearly anymore. Not completely. The fog had grown heavier, and every step I took felt like it was pulling me deeper into the forest. I called his name. My voice sounded small, swallowed. No answer. Just the whispering, the creaking of branches, and that smell again, metallic, wet, sharp. I ran, or tried to. My boots sank into the needles, my legs dragging. I shouted, but the sound was muffled, like the forest had ears and a mouth and was swallowing my voice whole. Panic rose, knotting in my stomach, and then I saw him. Not where he should be, not ahead on the path, but standing a little way off between two pines, staring at me. His face wasn't clear, just a blur, a shadow where his eyes should be. He didn't move, didn't blink. I called again, my voice cracking. And then he was gone. Just gone. I ran blindly, trying to retrace our steps, but the trail seemed different now. The trees were taller, closer together. Every landmark I thought I recognized was gone. My mind screamed, telling me it was impossible that I had been here before. But the forest didn't care what I knew. The whispers grew louder, though still soft, teasing me. I felt like I was being laughed at by the trees themselves. I don't remember how long I walked. Hours? Minutes? Time didn't exist. I remember stopping to catch my breath, leaning against a tree, chest heaving. I called out again. Silence. Only the whispering, only the smell, only that feeling crawling over my skin like icy fingers. Eventually, I stumbled into a small clearing. I wanted to collapse. My throat was raw, my legs burning, my mind screaming, and there, half buried in pine needles, was something that made me stop. A backpack. Jason's backpack. His name stitched on the front. It looked wrong. The straps were twisted. The zippers were undone. And inside, I couldn't bring myself to look further. I sat there for a long time, listening, waiting. I don't know what I expected, but the forest stayed quiet for a while, letting me feel like maybe he would come back, that I would see him emerge in the mist, laughing, saying it was all a prank. But I knew better. I felt it in my bones. Something had taken him. Or maybe he had wandered into something that wasn't meant to be found. As night crept in, the fog thickening like a living thing, I finally forced myself to keep moving. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know if I was going to find the trail. All I knew was that I couldn't stay. The forest, it wanted something. And I wasn't it. But Jason, he was gone. And I didn't know if I would ever see him again. After the clearing, I thought I had a direction. The trail, or at least what I hoped was a trail, seemed to stretch endlessly through the fog, each tree looming larger than the last. The mist had thickened overnight. Or maybe it was just me, moving slower, every step heavier than the last. I kept thinking I heard something behind me. The snap of a branch, a rustle in the needles, and each time I spun around there was nothing, but I didn't feel relief. Not really. The silence itself was heavier than sound, pressing against my ears, filling the spaces between my own panicked breathing. Then I saw them. Footprints. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but there was something wrong. Too many, too deep, like the ground had been pressed down with a weight I couldn't name. And the spacing was wrong. Not normal human steps. They didn't belong to Jason, or anyone I had seen before. They led off the faint trail, vanishing into a darker section of the forest where the fog seemed thicker, almost unnatural. I wanted to turn back, to go the other way, to ignore them entirely. I wanted to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks, the way it had before, when I saw shapes in the trees that weren't there. But something drew me forward, some stubborn piece of curiosity or fear, that told me I had to know where they led. The forest changed as I followed. The pines grew closer together, trunks like silent guards, and the ground underfoot became uneven. Roots twisted out of the earth like fingers, and each step made my shoes catch, pulling me down, slowing me, making me feel like the forest itself was trying to keep me here. And all the while, the fog clung to me, wet and cold, creeping into the sleeves of my jacket, down the back of my neck. I began to notice other things. Marks on the trees, subtle scratches in the bark, almost like someone or something had dragged its hands along them. They were too high for a child, too jagged to be a natural scrape. I ran my fingers over one, and it was damp, cold, even in the mild morning air. My stomach turned. I want to call out Jason's name, but my voice seemed too small, swallowed by the thick mist. The footprints led to a small depression in the ground, almost like a shallow pit. I knelt, trying to make sense of it, and that's when I saw them, tiny marks, too small for shoes, clustered around the edges of the prints. At first I thought they were animal tracks, but the pattern was deliberate, like someone had been trying to guide me or warn me. My heart pounded, each beat loud in my ears. I wanted to get up to leave, but my legs were frozen. Part of me wanted to follow the marks further, to see where they went, to understand. I kept moving, though cautiously. The forest seemed to react to my presence. Every step felt heavier, like the needles and dirt themselves were trying to trap me. Shadows stretched in ways that made no sense. A tree that looked solid from one angle seemed hollowed out from another, and always a fog, thick and suffocating, blurring the edges of my vision, making the familiar strange and the strange terrifying. I started to feel watched. Not the usual kind of being observed, but something deeper, older, something that didn't blink. Every time I stopped, I could hear faint whispers, not words exactly, but soft voices, almost chanting, just beyond comprehension. I spun around, trying to catch the source, but the fog swallowed it all. I called Jason's name, my voice shaking. Nothing answered, and for a moment I felt panic. True panic. The kind that grips your chest and refuses to let go. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it. The forest plays tricks, I told myself. You're alone, scared and tired. But then I saw a movement, a figure, or at least a shadow, darting between two trees. Too quick to be human, too deliberate to be a trick of light. I froze, holding my breath, trying to make it go away, hoping it would dissolve into the fog. But it didn't, and then it vanished. The air changed after that, thicker, harder to breathe. I felt like the mist was pressing down on my chest, forcing me forward, into the unknown. Every step I took, I felt the eyes on me, just at the edge of vision, not looking through me, but like they were waiting, patient and ancient. My mind kept screaming at me to turn back, to run, but my legs kept moving, drawn forward, step, by something I couldn't name. Then came the sounds, soft at first, like footsteps following mine, but irregular, stopping when I stopped, circling me when I moved. My pulse raced. I wanted to scream, to yell, to tell whatever it was to leave me alone, but I was too scared, too aware that my voice would betray me, that calling out might draw it closer. I reached a narrow path between two enormous pines. The footprints stopped here, just ended, and the whispers seemed louder, circling around me, echoing the fog, 1,000 soft, fractured voices saying nothing and everything at once. I knelt down, tracing the last impressions in the dirt, and that's when I noticed the smaller prints again, leading away from the main ones, deeper into the shadows. I wanted to leave, but the compulsion to follow them was too strong. My chest tightened, my mind told me to resist, but my legs moved on instinct. The path narrowed further. The fog grew darker, heavier, like it was pooling just for me. Shapes began to appear, twisted roots, rocks that seemed to shift if I stared too long. And the forest itself began to hum, a low vibration that resonated through my bones. My stomach churned. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to beg to be anywhere else. But I couldn't stop. Someone was guiding me, or watching me, or waiting for me. I came to a clearing eventually. Barely a clearing, really just a hollow in the trees, where the fog seemed thickest. And there, etched into the dirt in the middle of it, were more footprints. Too deep, too dark. And surrounding them were marks. Symbols maybe, or just scratches. I couldn't tell. But they were deliberate, arranged, waiting. I felt my throat tighten. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to step back, but my feet were rooted. And then I realized there was a presence behind me, not a shadow, not a shape, just something. I felt in the air, in the weight of the fog, in the sudden silence that swallowed the whispers. My hair stood on end. My stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but the forest wouldn't let me. It wouldn't let me leave, not yet. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my eyes on the last of the footprints. And then I saw it again. A figure, just on the edge of perception, moving between the pines. Taller than a man, thinner than a tree, almost shimmering in the fog. It didn't approach. It didn't retreat. It just existed, watching, waiting. And for a moment, I thought I recognized it. A laugh, a smile, Jason. But the face was wrong. Hollowed. Shadows where features should have been. And then it blinked, or maybe it didn't. I couldn't tell. My legs went weak. My mind screamed for me to run. And finally I did. I ran blindly, following nothing, hoping the fog would guide me back to the path, back to something real. But every step led me deeper into the forest. The footprints, the symbols, the whispering, all gone. Just fog, just silence. And that feeling, watching, waiting. By the time I collapsed against a tree, panting, soaked in sweat in the damp fog, I realized something horrible. I wasn't alone. I hadn't been alone since the first footprint appeared. Something had been here. Something had been waiting for me, and I had no idea how far it would follow, or how much it wanted me to see. I stayed there for hours, shivering, listening to the fog breathe, and I knew one thing with certainty. The forest wasn't empty. Not ever. And whatever had left the footprints, it wasn't done with me. Night fell faster than I expected. One moment, the sky was a pale gray. The next, darkness had swallowed the forest whole. I had lost the trail hours ago, or maybe minutes. Time didn't matter anymore. Everything blurred together. Fog, shadows, the scent of wet pine. My backpack hung heavy on my shoulders, a useless reminder of safety, of preparation. I should have turned back. I should have gone home. But I couldn't, not when something was out there. The first scream came from far away, high up the ridge. It was human, I think, or maybe it wasn't. My ears pricked, my blood froze. It was raw, jagged, unformed, like someone was trying to scream through a mouthful of mud. I stopped walking, convinced it was my imagination. But the sound came again, echoing between the trees, closer this time, weaving around me. I wanted to shout, to respond, to say, "It's okay, I'm here." But my voice died in my throat. I couldn't. I stumbled over a root, swearing under my breath, and the echo answered me. Not exactly an echo. It was something else, a warped reflection of my own panic, twisted and unfamiliar. I froze, listening. There was again, distant but clear, a scream, or a call. My mind kept trying to rationalize it. Some hiker hurt somewhere, a trapped animal, anything normal. But the forest didn't feel normal. Not tonight. I pressed forward, moving slowly, trying to stay calm, though my legs felt like lead. Every step felt wrong. The mist clung to me, soaking through my jacket, chilling me to the bone. And the voices, the ones I'd heard before, returned, softer this time, intertwined with the screams. Sometimes a whisper would sound like a familiar word. Sometimes it would mimic my own voice, calling my name. "Are you there?" it said. Or maybe I imagined it. I wasn't sure anymore. I wasn't sure I could trust anything. The trees seemed to lean closer. Their silhouettes stretched unnaturally, reaching down, brushing against fog. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. But I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Not like being watched, exactly, but like the forest itself was aware of my presence, like it had been waiting. Every rustle of a branch, every crack of a twig made my heart leap. I wanted to scream, to run, but my feet stayed glued to the soft earth. Then I heard another scream, closer this time. Piercing, wet, desperate. It wasn't a normal sound. My stomach dropped. I wanted to convince myself it was Jason, but it couldn't be. Not here, not now. Jason wouldn't sound like that. I shivered, imagining him, twisting in some pain I couldn't see, and my chest tightened. That fear was different. Real. I didn't want to feel it. But I couldn't stop. I kept walking. Or stumbling. I couldn't remember the last time my feet touched solid ground. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, hiding roots and rocks. I tripped again, fell face first into the wet earth, and felt the cold seep through my jacket. When I looked up, I swore I saw figures moving just beyond the mist. Not people. Not exactly. Too tall, too thin, too wrong. They didn't approach. They didn't retreat. They just watched. I forced myself to get up, shaking, gasping for air. I had to keep moving. I had to keep following the sound. Somewhere in the darkness, somewhere between the echoes and the fog, there was something I had to understand. Or maybe it had me already. The screams kept coming. Distant, then close, then distant again, echoing around me in ways that made no sense. Sometimes they overlapped with whispers, low, fractured, almost pleading. Sometimes the echoes mirrored my own breathing, slow and ragged, as if the forest was mocking me, copying me, wearing my voice like a mask. I wanted to stop. I wanted to curl into a ball and disappear. But my legs kept moving, driven by a mixture of fear and something else, curiosity, maybe desperation. I thought I saw a light, faint and flickering, deeper into the woods. I ran toward it, thinking it might be safety. Maybe a ranger's lantern, maybe another hiker, maybe Jason. But when I got closer, the light disappeared. Not flickered, disappeared entirely. And the scream returned louder, closer, coming from every direction at once. My head spun. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was alive. It moved. It followed me. I tried to call Jason's name again, but the fog stole it. My voice returned to something else, a distorted echo mocking me. "Where are you?" It said, dragging the syllables out until they felt like knives. I stumbled backward, tripping over unseen roots, landing hard against a tree. My palms burned from the friction, my knees stung. But I didn't care. I couldn't. Something was in the forest with me. Something that wasn't human. Something patient. Watching. Waiting. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed. Time didn't exist. The fog, the screams, the whispers, they became a part of me. Every breath I drew tasted damp and metallic. Every movement felt heavy and wrong. My mind started playing tricks, filling the spaces between sound with images that weren't there. Faces, shadows, twisted shapes of people I knew, but wrong. Not Jason, not me, something else. I saw a shadow shift along the tree line, and my stomach knotted. It moved like it was dancing, slipping between the trunks, never fully revealing itself. I called out again, my voice cracking. "Jason?" Nothing. Only the echo distorted, calling me back in, drawing me deeper. I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. Not yet. The forest began to feel alive. Not like a place with animals or wind, but aware, breathing, thinking, hunting. Every scream I heard seemed to originate from somewhere that wasn't there. The echoes twisted, stretched, bending around me in impossible ways. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to shut it out, but I couldn't. The sound wouldn't let me. It wouldn't forgive me. I stumbled into a small hollow, something like a clearing but narrower, surrounded by trees that leaned in unnaturally. The fog clung to me, pressing, suffocating. And then I heard it, clear, human, unmistakable, Jason's voice, calling my name, or at least something like his voice. My chest lifted with hope for a second, until the sound twisted, warping, stretching in a way that made my stomach drop. Then I fell to my knees, shaking, crying, trying to convince myself it was just panic, just fatigue, just the forest playing cruel tricks. But my heart knew better. I could feel it behind my eyes and my ears, in my chest. Something had him, or something was him. But not Jason, not anymore. The screams returned, closer this time, surrounding me. Whispers, moans, shouts, laughter, cries, layered, impossible, inhuman. I wanted to scream, to run, to escape, but the fog tangled my legs, the ground shifted beneath me, and I couldn't tell up from down. My mind started slipping, images colliding, memories mixing with nightmares I hadn't dreamed yet. I remembered the trail. I remembered Jason. I remembered the first footprints in the fog. And then I realized I wasn't following the forest anymore. The forest was following me, or worse, leading me, and whatever had left those marks, whatever had watched me, whatever screamed and whispered and mimicked my own voice, it wasn't finished. By the time the night was at its darkest, I could barely stand. My ears rang with echoes, my mind fractured with fear, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the scream again, sharp, raw, pleading as if someone or something was trapped, calling for help that would never come. And I understood with a deep, hollow certainty that I was not going to leave this forest the same. I might leave it all. I thought the sun might save me. I thought daylight might chase away the whispers, the shadows, the way the forest pressing on me from every side. But the sun never came. The mist lingered like a stubborn stain, and the trees seemed darker, older, closer. My legs were shaking, my lungs burning from running, twisting through the undergrowth. I could barely remember how I'd gotten there, or how long I'd been wandering. Time didn't exist in the fog. Not anymore. The backpack was still on my shoulders, damp and heavy, but useless. Jason's things were gone. Or at least, I couldn't find them. I kept searching, hoping, foolishly, that I'd stumble across him, that he'd be there, leaning against a tree, smirking and muttering, "Got you good." But the forest didn't play games. It swallowed him whole, and now it was turning its attention to me. I reached the edge of what I thought was a clearing and froze. The ground was scarred, churned up, but in a way that made no sense. The marks weren't footprints. Not entirely. They were too deep, pressed into the soil as if something heavier than a human had walked there. And yet, the pattern was wrong. Uneven, jagged, almost deliberate. They formed circles, spirals, lines that led nowhere. I knelt and traced them with my fingers, feeling the damp soil crumble beneath my touch. The shapes made no sense, but I felt their meaning, or at least I felt the warning. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to throw myself at the edge of the forest and hope for something, anything, to catch me. But my feet didn't move. My body was frozen in place by a mix of fear, exhaustion, and a terrible sense that the forest itself was watching. And then I noticed something I'll never forget. Small impressions, like fingerprints pressed into the dirt. Not human fingerprints. Exactly. Smaller, elongated, unnatural. They swirled around the deeper marks, as if something had walked in the soil and left a memory behind. A message. I didn't understand it. I couldn't, but I felt it in my chest, deep and cold. The feeling of being watched was nothing compared to this. This was an imprint of presence, a lingering proof that something had been here, something that wasn't human. I called Jason's name, and for a moment, I thought I heard him respond. Faint, distant, warped. A sound stretched across the mist, a shadow of a voice that shouldn't exist. My chest tightened. Hope surged and was crushed instantly. The sound didn't come from him. It came from the forest, from the shapes in the soil, from the air itself. It was as if the forest was speaking or laughing, or both at once. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots and moss. My knees scraped against the stones. My palms burned from bracing against the ground, but I didn't care. I had to get out. I had to leave. The forest had already taken him. It had already marked me, and I wasn't going to wait for it to finish. I ran blindly, following nothing. The trees shifted, branches reaching toward me, brushing my face, tearing at my jacket. The fog wrapped around me like a living thing, clinging, tugging, trying to slow me down. And then I saw the last traces. Not footprints, not shapes, something else. Shadows pressed into the ground, darker than the soil, deeper than the footprints. They looked like silhouettes, like someone had stepped out of themselves and left the imprint behind. I fell to my knees again. I touched one of the marks. Cold, hard, not like stone, not like soil. It hummed under my fingers, almost imperceptibly, vibrating with a pulse I couldn't name. My mind screamed for me to move, to leave, to ignore it. But curiosity, dread, and terror twisted together, forcing me to stare. I remembered the way Jason had laughed that morning, the way the mist had smelled, the way the first footprints had appeared. I remembered everything I should have ignored. I realized then that nothing would ever be normal again. Nothing would ever be safe. The forest had claimed him, and now it had claimed a piece of me, even if I didn't know it yet. The whispers returned, soft at first, barely there. I strained to hear them, afraid to, knowing that listening meant understanding something I didn't want to understand. They seemed to come from the marks themselves, rising from the soil like heat from a fire, wrapping around me, pulling at my thoughts. I felt my mind bending, stretching, cracking under the weight of it. I couldn't think straight anymore. Names, voices, memories. They swirled together until I couldn't tell what was real. I tried to run, but the path seemed endless. Every clearing, every bend, every shallow hollow I thought might lead to safety brought me deeper into the same repeating nightmare. The marks in the soil followed me, or maybe I was following them. I couldn't tell. My heart pounded, my lungs burned, my stomach twisted. And still, the forest watched. And still, the forest whispered. I saw shapes again, not moving exactly, but shifting, as if they existed in a space slightly out of sync with mine. They were human-like, but wrong. Too thin, too tall, too still. One of them tilted its head, and I felt its gaze pierce through me. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but my body refused. My mind was splitting, bending under the pressure of the unseen eyes and the vibrating soil beneath my fingers. The smell returned, the same sharp, metallic scent I remembered from the first day. It burned my nose, made my throat close up. I realized then that the forest had been waiting for me from the very beginning, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to follow. The footprints, the whispers, the shapes, they weren't random. They were a trail, a test, a warning I didn't heed. And Jason had failed. I fell into a small hollow, exhausted, trembling. The soil there was covered in deeper marks, swirls and patterns like the forest itself had etched them. I pressed my face to the ground, trying to make sense of them, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw him, Jason, not moving, not speaking, just a shadow pressing to the earth. But when I blinked, it was gone. Only the marks remained, only the proof, only the impossibility. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I didn't care. The fog never lifted. The forest never released me. I wandered, stumbled, crawled, following nothing, guided by nothing, except the slow, gnawing certainty that I was being watched. The whispers rose again, louder, layered, incomprehensible, and then silence, as if the forest had paused, considering me, judging me, deciding how much of me it would take. I don't know how long I stayed in that hollow, pressed against the soil, listening, breathing, shaking. My throat was raw from calling names that never answered. My hands were bleeding from grasping at roots and rocks, trying to keep myself upright, and still the marks remained. Every step I had taken, every panic-stricken turn, every moment of hope and fear. It was all etched into the earth, a record of my presence, a proof that I had been here. And then I understood. The forest doesn't let go. It doesn't forget. It doesn't care. Whatever had claimed Jason had left traces behind, marks that would outlast me, marks that were older than me, older than the trees themselves, the proof of its existence. And now it had my footprints, my marks, my memory pressed into the soil alongside his. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to vanish. But there was nothing left to do. The forest had him. The forest had me, in a way I didn't fully understand yet. And when I looked up, I realized something I'll never forget. The clearing was empty. No Jason. No figures. No hope. Only the marks. Lingering. Inexplicable. Permanent. I walked away then. Not running. Not fast. Just walking. Dragging myself. Leaving my own proof behind. Hoping, praying that somewhere, somehow, someone would see the signs and understand. That I would survive. That I would escape. But deep down I knew the forest doesn't let go. And whatever had taken him, whatever had marked the soil, it was still here, watching, waiting, and I would never be the same. I remember the first time I saw the apartment. It was a gray, rainy evening, the kind where the city seems to fold on itself, and every light looks like a weak flicker against the dark. The building wasn't much. Old brick, peeling paint. A fire escape that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 80s. The kind of place nobody notices. Unless you have to. I had to. The rent was cheap, shockingly so, and I was desperate. I didn't care about charm or comfort. I cared about having a roof over my head. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew, damp carpet, and something older, sour, and stubborn. I checked in with the manager, a man with a gray, lifeless stare and a cough that rattled like gravel in his throat. He handed me the keys wordlessly, and as I took them, he muttered something under his breath. I didn't hear it clearly, but it sounded like a warning that I chose not to hear. The elevator groaned as it climbed, metal shrieking against metal. I held my breath, gripping the railing, thinking about how the floors had probably swallowed years of footsteps. Some small, some desperate, some angry. The air was thick with the smell of wet paint and dust. I tried to tell myself it was normal. I tried to remind myself that it was just an old building. But there was a tension in the air I couldn't shake, something that made my skin crawl and my chest tighten. My apartment was on the 4th floor. When I opened the door, it smelled of old smoke and stale air. The wallpaper was yellowed, curling at the edges. The hardwood floor creaked under my feet in places I didn't expect. I set my bags down and looked around. Small, bare, cheap, exactly what I'd signed up for. The first night, I unpacked quietly. The rain tapped against a window, steady and hypnotic, and I tried to ignore the hum of the radiator. That's when I heard it. A knock. Not loud, not demanding. Just a soft tap. Tap! Tap on the ceiling. I froze, listening. Another knock. Tap, tap, tap. I thought maybe it was the apartment settling. Old buildings do that. But my heart started to race anyway. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe it was upstairs. Maybe a neighbor moving furniture. I tried to focus on unpacking. Tried to breathe evenly, but the knocks didn't stop. They weren't random. They were deliberate, measured, and every time I moved to another room, they seemed to follow, echoing above me, circling the ceiling like a predator pacing its cage. A few days later, I met one of the neighbors in the hallway, a woman in her 50s, tall and thin, her hair tied in a tight bun. She gave me a polite smile, but her eyes were wary, almost frightened. "You just moved in?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded. "Yeah, 4th floor." The manager showed me the apartment. She frowned. "You're brave. Moving there. Did you know about the last tenant?" I shook my head. "No, what happened?" Her expression hardened. They disappeared. Just gone. One morning, the apartment was empty. Clothes still in the closet. Dishes in the sink. No note. No sign of struggle. The police never found anything. Some people say it's the walls. Some say... She trailed off, shaking her head. I laughed nervously, trying to ease the tension. "The walls?" She nodded, serious. "Yes, old buildings like this, sometimes they keep what they've seen. Or take it. I wouldn't stay long if I were you." I forced a smile, told myself it was just a story, an urban legend to scare new tenants. But her words lingered like smoke in my lungs. That night, the knocking returned. Tap, 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 only louder this time. The kind of sound that can't be ignored. I pressed my hands to my ears, tried to breathe, tried to convince myself it was nothing. But my body knew better. My heart pounded. The sound wasn't random. It followed a pattern. Deliberate, waiting, patient. I got up, flashlight in hand, and checked the ceiling. Nothing. No sign of anyone. No loose boards. No pipe banging. Nothing. And yet, the tapping continued, a rhythm too regular to be coincidence. I sank back into my chair, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline, and whispered to myself, "It's nothing. It's nothing. It's nothing." Sleep came in fits. Half dreams, half waking moments. I dreamed of shadows moving just beyond my vision, of figures pressed against the walls, staring, waiting. The tapping never stopped, even in the dreams, echoing above me, growing louder, more insistent. A week later, I found a note slipped under my door, small, folded, and handwritten. I picked it up with shaking hands. The words were messy, hurried, almost scratched into the paper. They watch. They wait. Don't listen. I dropped it immediately, stomach churning. My mind raced. The neighbors? The building? The police? None of it made sense. I wanted to burn the note, throw it away, forget it existed. But the fear clung to me, tighter than the apartment itself. I started noticing other things. Shadows where they shouldn't be. Slight movements in the corner of my eyes. Footsteps above me, even when I knew no one was there. Sometimes I could swear I heard a voice. A whisper, maybe faint but unmistakable. Stay. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? They'd think I was losing my mind. I would have thought so myself if I weren't living it. The fear settled in my bones, quiet and patient. I found myself avoiding certain rooms, avoiding looking up, avoiding the ceiling. But the feeling followed me everywhere, watching, waiting. One evening, I woke to find the apartment unusually cold. The heater was running, the radiator steaming as usual, but the cold pressed in from the corners, the cracks in the walls, the spaces between the floorboards. I got up to check the thermostat, and that's when I heard it again. Not tapping, not a knock, a low, deliberate scrape across the ceiling, like fingernails or claws, dragging slowly, methodically. I froze. My chest tightened. The air itself seemed heavier. The scraping continued, circling, moving closer. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to throw everything I own out the window and leave. But I couldn't. Something held me there. Something made me watch, listen, wait. The next morning, I found more signs. Scratches along the walls, faint but there. Marks and patterns I couldn't decipher. Symbols? Letters? My mind refused to commit them to logic. They were just there, proof that someone or something had been in my apartment while I slept, while I thought I was alone. I tried to leave, packed my things, called a friend to pick me up, anything. But the streets outside felt wrong. The rain was heavier, the city silent, oppressive. I returned to the apartment. Something about it drew me back, pulled me in. I hated it. I feared it. And yet, I couldn't escape it. I started leaving small notes for myself. Warnings, reminders, things like check the ceiling, watch the corners, don't ignore the tapping. I tried to be rational, tried to keep control, but the apartment had its own logic, its own patience, its own time, and the warnings from the neighbors, the stories about the last tenant. I realized I had walked straight into the same pattern. The night returned, the tapping returned, the scraping, the whispers, the low vibrations that made the floor feel alive. I pressed my face into my hands, trying to block it out, tried to breathe through it, tried to tell myself it was just an old building, just stress, just imagination. But deep down I knew better, and I knew I was not alone. It started the night I thought I could finally sleep. I had unpacked enough to feel like a human again, like I belonged somewhere, even if that somewhere was a peeling apartment on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of damp wood and mildew. I had convinced myself the knocking had been a one-time thing, maybe a neighbor moving furniture or the building settling. I had convinced myself I was imagining it. But at midnight, I woke to sound. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes snapped open, heart hammering against my ribs. The sound came from above me. The apartment upstairs was empty. Everyone knew it. The manager had told me. The previous tenant had disappeared without a trace. The thought should have been comforting. At least no one lived there. But instead, it made the knocking far worse. I sat up in bed, listening. Tap, tap, tap. Again, the pattern was too deliberate to be random. It wasn't like the normal settling noises of an old building. It wasn't pipes contracting or the wind rattling the windows. It was patient, intentional, waiting, and I felt deep in my chest, that I was being tested or watched. I got out of bed, careful not to make a sound. I tiptoed across the apartment, gripping the doorknob of the kitchen, thinking maybe I could open a window and hear something outside. Maybe I could rationalize it. But as soon as I moved, the tapping changed. Faster, lighter, closer, like it had heard me, like it was aware. My palms were damp, and I felt my stomach twist. I wanted to scream, but my voice stuck in my throat. I looked around the apartment. Everything seemed normal. The furniture, the unpacked boxes, the small lamp in the corner, all unchanged. But the moment I turned toward the ceiling, the tapping stopped. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. And then a single knock. Tap. Louder, more resonant. Right above my head. I froze. My mind raced. The empty apartment upstairs should have been abandoned for months. The walls were old, thin, and probably hollow, but still, I knew that sound was deliberate. Someone or something was there, waiting, watching. I crept to the living room window and peered out. Rain streaked down the glass. Streetlights smeared into orange halos. Nothing moved outside. No neighbor, no stranger, nothing. The knocking started again, soft this time, like a whisper against the ceiling. Tap, 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 and now it was following a rhythm I couldn't identify, a rhythm that twisted inside my head until I felt dizzy. I backed away from the window, hands pressed to my ears, trying to block it out. But the sound found me in every corner, bouncing, echoing, circling. It wasn't just knocking anymore, it was communication. Something trying to reach me, or warn me, or lure me. Sleep was impossible after that. I stayed awake all night, flashlight in hand, moving through the apartment, listening, waiting. Every tap, every creak, every groan of the old building set my nerves on edge. I could feel it above me, something moving, pacing, deliberate. And sometimes I thought I could hear it breathing, slow, steady, patient. The next day, I tried to ignore it, pretend it hadn't happened, but the sounds followed me in memory. I found myself glancing at the ceiling whenever I entered a room, imagining shadows pressing down from the apartment above. The more I tried to ignore it, the more insistent the memory became. Tap, tap, tap. A week later, I met the neighbor from the hallway again, the woman with the tight bun and wary eyes. She asked how I was settling in, and I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her I was fine, but I couldn't, not entirely. Something about the apartment made honesty impossible, because saying out loud made it real. I hear things at night, I admitted quietly, from the apartment above. Knocks tapping. Sometimes it feels like someone's moving in there. Her expression tightened. She looked at me as if I had confessed to something terrible. I warned you, she said. They're not normal noises. Nothing about that apartment is normal. Nobody has lived there for months, but people still hear it. Every new tenant hears it. They knock, they pace, they wait. I wanted to ask who they were, but I couldn't. She didn't elaborate. She shook her head and walked away, leaving me alone with the dread that had been growing inside me since the day I moved in. That night, I decided to confront it. I set my phone to record, sat in the center of the living room, and waited for midnight. When the time came, the knocking started. Tap, tap, tap. I pressed record, my hands trembling. The sound wasn't random. It circled the ceiling, paused, moved, repeated. And then something new, a low creaking, almost like someone dragging a foot across the floor. Above me, slowly, methodically, I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but I stayed. I forced myself to listen. I wanted to understand. And then I heard it, a faint whisper carried to the wood and plaster, so soft I almost didn't believe it. Stay. I froze. My blood ran cold. I looked up at the ceiling, straining to see something. I thought I was getting used to the apartment. I thought the tapping, the whispers, the scraping overhead were just the building settling. Old pipes, old floors, old paint. I thought I could ignore it. I thought I could sleep through it. But that night, everything changed. I was lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, pretending to read, when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. A shadow, small at first, just a flicker against the peeling paint, moving too smoothly, too deliberately. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. The lamp on the bedside table cast light in every direction, but the shadow didn't belong to anything in the room. My own hand didn't stretch that far. The outline of it shifted, curling like smoke, forming shapes that made no sense. I rubbed my eyes, blinked, focused again, and it was still there, flickering, stretching, growing, not obeying the angle of the lamp, not tethered to any object. Something was moving above me, something alive, or at least I felt alive, watching, waiting. I told myself it was my imagination, just stress, fatigue, paranoia. But the moment I tried to close my eyes, the shadow changed. It stretched along the ceiling, elongated like it was creeping forward, moving with a slow, deliberate rhythm. My hands shook, my fingers curling into the sheets, and I couldn't look away. The longer I stared, the more it multiplied. Flickers of shapes, silhouettes overlapping, twisting, shifting. Sometimes humanoid, sometimes impossible, like the ceiling itself had grown limbs and eyes. I tried to speak, tried to tell it to stop. My voice came out weak, almost swallowed by the air. It didn't stop. I remembered the neighbor's warnings. The last tenant, the disappearance. I tried to laugh it off, shake it away. It's just a building, I whispered to myself. Nothing else. But my own words fell hollow. I could feel the air grow colder, heavier, a pressure pressed down, and I realized I was holding my breath, terrified to let out, terrified it would draw attention. I got up, flashlight in hand, and scanned the ceiling, the corners, the walls. The shadows moved just beyond reach, dissolving when I tried to focus directly on them, only to reappear in new forms a moment later. They seemed to anticipate my gaze, slipping and shifting just out of alignment, like they existed in a layer of reality slightly off from mine. I thought I saw them reach down, elongating toward me, but every time I moved, they receded. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of bed, heart racing, chest tight. The flashlight flickered, throwing long, shaky beams across the room, but it didn't illuminate anything real. The shadows were independent, not tied to light, not tied to form. I remembered the low scratches I had heard the night before, the tapping, the scraping, and then I realized I wasn't imagining them. They were part of the same presence, the same thing that had been in the apartment before me, the same thing that had been waiting, watching. The shadows above me were alive in a way I couldn't name. I sank to the floor, pressing my back against the wall. The ceiling seemed to pulse, ripple, breathe. The shadows moved with it, forming twisted versions of faces I recognized. Mine, Jason's, shapes from dreams I hadn't dared to have yet. I couldn't look directly at them. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. And the whispers returned, low and impossible, circling me, sometimes mimicking my own thoughts, sometimes forming words I didn't want to understand. Stay, watch, follow. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. I don't know. Time had no meaning. The shadows didn't stop. They didn't rest. They didn't blink. They just existed, observing, patient, indifferent. I tried to focus on something else, anything else, but my mind kept returning to the ceiling, to the impossible forms, to the weight of their gaze. The longer I stared, the more I felt my own reflection in the shadows. Not my body, not my face, but my thoughts, my fear, my doubt. They were watching not just me, but everything inside me, every insecurity, every fleeting hope, every memory. And it felt wrong, violating, unbearable. I don't know why I did it, but I reached up, hand trembling. I tried to touch the ceiling, to press my fingers into plaster. The shadows recoiled, writhing, twisting away. But as I touched, I felt something. Cold, wet, not solid, not liquid. Something in between. A sensation that made my blood run cold. And then it pulled away, leaving nothing but the pale, cracked plaster. I wanted to scream. I wanted to leave. I wanted to destroy everything in the apartment. to run into the night and never look back. But I couldn't. Not yet. Something had me in its grip. Something that didn't want me to leave, that wanted me to watch, to notice, to understand. The next morning, the sunlight barely touched the corners of the room. The shadows were gone. I thought, for a moment, that it was over, that maybe it had been a dream, a trick of exhaustion and fear. But the scratches on the ceiling remained. Small, shallow marks that hadn't been there before. Symbols? Letters? I didn't recognize them. But I knew in that moment that the apartment had left its mark on me, and I had left mine on it. The tapping and scraping continued at night, less frequent now, but still there. I knew, deep down, that the shadows were waiting. Patient, indifferent, eternal. The apartment was alive in a way I didn't understand. And every time I lay down to sleep, I felt them above me, just out of reach, watching. I stopped trying to ignore them. I stopped trying to rationalize. I started documenting, writing down the marks, recording the sounds, tracing the patterns in the ceiling, hoping, praying that some order existed, that if I could understand them, I could survive. But the truth is, understanding didn't help. Understanding never helped. The shadows moved independently of everything I knew, of every law of physics, of every piece of reason I had left. They didn't obey logic. They didn't need it. And I realized then, in a cold, sinking moment, that I was living in a space that had its own rules. When I didn't know, when I couldn't escape, and yet I couldn't leave. I was trapped by the rent, by necessity, by a stubborn hope that I could coexist, that I could outlast them. But every night, every fleeting moment of darkness reminded me that I wasn't alone, that the shadows had been here before me, that they would be here after, waiting, watching. And one night, I understood the worst part. The shadows didn't just watch me. They were learning me, memorizing the way I breathed, the way I blinked, the way my heart raced when I thought no one was looking. They were patient. They were infinite. And they didn't need me to see them to exist. They existed for themselves, for the apartment, for something older and colder than I could imagine. Sleep became impossible. Days blurred together. My mind twisted around itself. I would stare at the ceiling for hours, watching the faintest flicker, imagining shapes, hearing voices, feeling breath on my neck. And the apartment stayed alive. Constant, indifferent, terrifying. It started with the smell. A faint, sour odor that hung in the stairwell. Barely noticeable at first, but persistent. I noticed it as I came home that evening, dragging groceries up the narrow stairs. The elevator was out again, always out. And the air smelled older than the building itself, like decay waiting to be noticed. My apartment was on the 4th floor. Her apartment was above mine. Apartment 5B. Mrs. Callahan had lived upstairs for years. Quiet, neat, older than most of the tenants. She had a routine. Grocery bags every Tuesday. Newspaper folded neatly on her table every morning. Curtains drawn at night. She was a person of habits. A presence. But that night, something was wrong. The smell was the first warning. Then I noticed a mail piling up by her door. The papers, the bills, stacked in neat towers, untouched. The light in her apartment was off, though she usually left it on until she went to bed. I knocked gently, calling her name. Mrs. Callahan? You home? No answer. I waited, knocked again. The sound echoed back at me from the narrow hallway. Too hollow, too empty. I tried the doorknob. It was locked, of course, but the lock felt colder than normal. Harder to turn. I stepped back, uneasy. The next morning, I noticed something worse. The newspaper had been delivered, stacked neatly by the doors always, but now a smell worse than before filled the air. Something sharp, something sour. I called out again, softly this time, but still nothing. The hall was empty, the building quiet, too quiet. I went downstairs to the lobby. The manager, gray and cough-rattled, looked at me like I was an inconvenience. Apartment 5B? I asked voice tight. He coughed. Yes. Have you seen Mrs. Callahan? She hasn't come out in 2 days. The mail is piling up. He paused, shifting his weight. Oh, she's fine. probably out somewhere, visiting family. Maybe, don't worry about it. I didn't believe him. I wanted an explanation. But the pit in my stomach told me something was wrong. Something worse than absence. That evening, I heard the first unusual sound. Not the tapping, not the scraping. Something else. A soft thump, like a heavy object hitting the floor above, then silence. Then another. My stomach churned. I wanted to tell myself it was normal. Old buildings make noises. Pipes settle. Floors creak. But it wasn't normal. Not like this. Not when it came with the smell and the silence and the absence. I went upstairs. Pressed my ear to her door. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to knock, to call, to demand an answer. I wanted to run back to my apartment and pretend nothing had happened. But something made me stand there. Listen. Wait. The next day, I called the police. A missing person report. They said someone would come. They asked routine questions. When I mentioned the smell, they raised eyebrows. Asked if I was sure it wasn't from the trash. Asked if I was imagining it. They didn't seem concerned. They said they'd check it out. They did. They went upstairs. Spent hours there. Footsteps, voices, doors opening and closing. I waited in the hall, holding my stomach, praying I would hear something. Anything. Hours later, they came back down. Shook their heads. No one's here. They said, no signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle. Apartment appears empty. Nothing unusual. Nothing unusual. I stared at them, unable to speak. My mind raced. The smell, the noises, the absence of her presence, the piling mail. It was all there. Everything screamed that something had happened, that someone had disappeared, that the apartment had swallowed her whole. But according to the police, nothing existed. Nothing at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my bed, listening to the silence above me. It wasn't silent. The air shifted. The walls creaked, and in the corners of my vision, I thought I saw movement. Shadows stretching against the ceiling. Silhouettes that weren't mine. Shapes that shouldn't exist. I tried to rationalize. Maybe she moved out without telling anyone. Maybe she went to visit family. Maybe she left in a hurry. But deep down, I knew the apartment hadn't let her go. Whatever was in the walls, whatever had been patient and waiting and watching, had taken her. And now it had all the time in the world to wait for me. The smell came back, stronger this time. A metallic tang, sour and sweet at once, filling the hall, curling under the door, pressing into my nostrils. I gagged, turned on the lights, tried to air it out, but it wouldn't leave. It didn't belong to the trash, or the plumbing, or the building. It belonged to her, or to whatever had taken her. I checked the ceiling above me, staring at the cracks, the peeling paint. Shadows flickered. The tapping, the scraping, the faint whispering returned. But it was different now. More deliberate, more patient. Like the apartment itself was alive, aware, and waiting for my reactions. The whispers weren't random. They were precise, mimicking my thoughts, anticipating my fears. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Something held me. Not the rent, not fear of homelessness, but something older, deeper. I was drawn in, compelled to observe, compelled to notice, compelled to exist within its rules. I kept thinking about Mrs. Callahan, about the last tenant, about every warning I had ignored. And I understood the apartment doesn't let go. It doesn't release its occupants. Not fully, not willingly. I tried to talk to the neighbors, to confirm what I already knew. They were polite but distant. One mentioned seeing her leave once, weeks ago, but no one had seen her return. Another shrugged and muttered about old buildings, strange noises, the things you can't explain. Everyone treated it lightly, as if it were nothing. But I knew. I could feel the absence, smell the residue, hear the echo of footsteps that weren't there. Nights became unbearable. I lay in bed listening. The ceiling above me was no longer empty. Footsteps, faint but deliberate pacing. Shadows stretching across the cracks and peeling paint. The air thickening, pressing down, waiting. And always, always the smell. I started documenting everything. Sounds, smells, movements, shadows, every pattern, every small anomaly. I needed proof. I needed reason. I needed to understand. But the apartment resisted. The longer I stayed, the more the apartment exerted its presence, shifting in ways I couldn't anticipate, growing stranger, stranger. One night, I swore I saw her, Mrs. Callahan, standing in the corner of the hall outside my door, pale, motionless, staring. But when I blinked, she was gone. Only the faint trace of smell remained, lingering like a warning, like a message. This place doesn't let go. I tried calling out to her, pleading, demanding an explanation, but my voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the thick air. And then the whispers returned. Not human, not familiar, just present, surrounding me, folding around me, folding me in. And I realized fully with a sinking dread that Mrs. Callahan hadn't left. She had been claimed, taken, absorbed into the walls, the floors, the very essence of the apartment. The police had found nothing because there was nothing to find. The apartment erased its traces, swallowed its evidence, leaving only emptiness and the patient waiting presence. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I couldn't rationalize. Every creak, every tap, every shadow was a reminder, a message, a warning, that whatever had taken her wasn't done, that it knew I was here, that it was waiting, and that the longer I stayed, the more I understood the terrible truth. Apartments like this don't just house people. They take them. They claim them. And the missing ones? They never leave. The stairwell had always been narrow, dimly lit, smelling faintly of mildew and wet concrete. But over the past week, it had taken on a life of its own. Every time I walked down it, I felt it pressing in on me, curling around my senses like smoke. And then the whispers started. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Low, almost imperceptible at first, as if the walls themselves were murmuring secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I thought it was my imagination. Old buildings make noises, right? Pipes, floors, the hum of electricity. But this was different. The words didn't make sense at first. Just murmurs, consonants brushing against each other in strange patterns, forming syllables that didn't belong. I remember the first time I heard it clearly. I was coming home late, groceries in hand, keys shaking in my palm. The lights flickered as I stepped onto the first stair. That's when I heard a voice whisper my name. Not my full name, just the first one, stretched and warped, like someone had sung it through a broken speaker. Cash. I froze, dropped the bags. Heart hammering, I looked around. Nobody. Empty stairwell. The fluorescent light buzzed, the sound barely masking the whisper that seemed to echo from everywhere at once. I told myself it was nothing, just fatigue, just nerves, just a city pressing in through the cracks. I picked up my bags and ran up the stairs, muttering reassurances I didn't believe. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, as if the building was learning my rhythm, tracking my steps. Sometimes they didn't follow the stairwell. They followed me into my apartment. I would be sitting on my bed, try to write, try to read, and I could hear them curling through the walls, curling under floorboards, brushing against my ears. Words, half words, my thoughts repeated back to me. Hints of things I didn't even know I thought. I stopped inviting friends over. I stopped answering calls. I stopped looking in mirrors. It wasn't just fear. It was exhaustion, confusion, a creeping sense that reality itself was twisting. The whispers spoke in patterns I couldn't understand, rhythms my mind couldn't follow. Yet, somehow, I knew they were learning me, watching me, waiting for me to slip. One night, I forced myself to confront it. I took the stairs slowly, counting each step, gripping the railing, breathing shallow. This is nothing. It's just sound, just the building. I whispered aloud, but halfway up, the whispers changed. They matched my voice, my tone, my hesitation, and then something I didn't expect, a response, a word, or something like a word. Stop. It wasn't polite. It wasn't human. It didn't come from anywhere specific. It came from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, under the stairs, wrapping around me like cold smoke. My chest tightened. My fingers shook on the railing. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and escape. But something made me keep going. Something compelled me. By the third night, I was sleep deprived. The whispers had started to pierce my dreams. I would wake gasping, my mind replaying the words over and over. Sometimes they were coherent. Sometimes they were nonsense. But always they followed me. Watch. Wait. Follow. I started to hear them in the elevator too, though I avoided it. Even when I left the building entirely, I could swear I heard them trailing me, faint, warped, echoing in my skull. I tried writing it down, tried recording it, but my phone would only pick up static. No words, no voice, just a low hum. And yet, I knew what I had heard. I remembered it. Every syllable, every pause, every stretch of sound. My own voice, repeated back to me in tones I didn't recognize. The neighbors noticed. I'm sure they did. I don't know if they understood. Maybe they assumed I was losing my mind. I could hear footsteps sometimes behind the walls, moving in patterns that matched my own. Or were they mine? I couldn't tell anymore. I started seeing shapes in the stairwell. Faint, flickering figures just beyond my vision. Sometimes human, sometimes not. Always patient, always observing. The smell returned as well. Sour, metallic, curling under the door, pressing up through the vents. It mixed with the whispers in a way that made my stomach churn. I stopped eating. I stopped drinking. The hunger, the thirst, the exhaustion, they were nothing compared to the pull of the voices. They were teaching me, shaping me. I could feel my own thoughts slipping, folding in on themselves. One night, I tried something different. I spoke back. I whispered into the stairwell, my voice barely audible. Who are you? The silence was complete at first. Then a pause. And then in a low, grating murmur that crawled under my skin came the answer. Yours. I froze. My blood ran cold. Not mine. Not you, as in a person. Yours. Owned. Claimed. The word vibrated through the walls, through the floorboards, into my chest. My own heartbeat thundered in my ears. I tried to run. I tried to escape, but I could feel it wrapping around me, pressing, patient, waiting. I realized then that the stairwell wasn't just a passage. It wasn't just space. It was alive. Or at least, it had a consciousness of its own. It held the previous tenants, the missing neighbors, the walls echoing with all the things they had whispered, screamed, thought. And now it held me too, recording every step, every breath, every fear. I stopped leaving the apartment. Every time I tried, the stairwell seemed to change. Steps stretched longer than they should. Corners curved unnaturally. Shadows flickered independently of the light. The whispers greeted me wherever I turned. The building was patient, patient beyond comprehension. And I began to understand the terrible truth. The apartment doesn't just house people. It molds them, shapes them, claims them. I don't know how long it's been like this. Days? Weeks? Months? Time blends when your mind is constantly racing, constantly listening, constantly trying to separate reality from illusion. I stopped looking for patterns in the stairs. I stopped counting. I stopped naming the whispers. I just let them be. Let them shape the rhythm of my heart, the timing of my steps. Let them teach me what it means to be here. And the whispers, they are favorites. I can feel it. They respond differently when I speak aloud. They tighten around my thoughts when I think things I shouldn't. They tease, taunt, echo, mirror. Sometimes I catch a fragment of another tenant's voice. A scream, a cry for help. But by the time I strain to focus, it's gone, lost in the hum of the walls. And I am alone, alone with them. I can feel my sanity slipping thread by thread. The apartment has a rhythm, a pulse, and I am part of it now. My thoughts are no longer private. My steps no longer my own. Even when I close my eyes, the whispers fill the darkness, curling into my ears, shaping my dreams, bending my will. I don't leave anymore. I don't try. The stairwell watches. The stairwell listens. And it waits. Always. And I know, deep down, that one day, I won't just hear the whispers. I'll become one of them. Part of the building. Patient. Indifferent. Eternal. Until then, I walk the stairs. Count the steps. Listen. Watch. And remember that I am not alone. The whispers are always there. Always. Waiting. I hadn't thought about Camp Pine Hollow in years. Not until I drove past the turnoff on that overgrown road. The one I had taken countless times as a kid, back when summer stretched endlessly ahead of me, and every tree seemed alive with possibility. The sign was still there, or what remained of it. The letters had faded, peeling in the sun, the wooden post leaning to one side as if bowing under some invisible weight. Curiosity, or maybe nostalgia, made me turn down the path. The road was rough, cracked with weeds clawing through every seam. The deeper I drove, the heavier the air became, damp and earthy, tinged with something I couldn't name. A smell like wet wood and moss mixed with something acrid, metallic. My chest tightened. I told myself it was nothing, just a forest, just memories pressing back. When I reached the campgrounds, my first thought was that the place had been abandoned for a long time. Cabins sagged at odd angles, paint long gone, windows dark, some shattered. Rusted swings hung silently from gnarled trees, squeaking faintly when the wind blew just right. The fire pit where we had gathered every night was filled with ash that looked newer than I expected, black and powdery, almost deliberate. And there were signs, subtle but unsettling, that people had left in a hurry. Plates still on tables, a backpack lying on the ground, shoes by a cabin door. It was as if everyone had vanished mid-step. I parked the car near the main lodge and stepped out, boots crunching over dry leaves. Silence greeted me. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees. Just a silence that seemed to hum, like the air itself was waiting for something to happen. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Nature settles in abandoned places. But the feeling lingered, pressing the edges of my awareness, whispering that this place had been emptied for a reason. I wandered to the cabins, recognizing the outlines from my childhood, the bunks we had slept in, scratched with our names and initials over the years, the graffiti on the walls, the faint echo of laughter. And yet, each step I took left me uneasy. Nothing was in its place. Drawers left open, belongings scattered as if someone had left mid-motion. I imagined the campers running, startled by some sudden fear, abandoning everything to escape. But the thought made my stomach churn. Why? What could have driven them away so quickly? I found the arts and crafts shed next. The door hung crooked, chains broken. Inside, supplies were strewn across the floor. Paint cans overturned, brushes scattered, half-finished project left as if someone had been interrupted. I knelt to examine the paper collage, its colors still vivid despite the years. But something about it felt wrong. The shapes didn't make sense, almost grotesque. Figures elongated, faces distorted. Not the work of children. At least, not entirely. The deeper I explored, the more I felt watched. Shadows moved in corners of my eyes, shifting just beyond my focus. I would turn, heart hammering, and find nothing. Just empty cabins, empty trails, empty swings. Yet the sensation persisted. A weight in the air, a tension that followed me with every step. It wasn't fear yet, not fully. It was anticipation. Expectation. The sense that the camp remembered me, remembered everything, and it wasn't entirely pleased to see me back. I followed a familiar trail toward the lake. The path was overgrown, weeds brushing against my legs, twisting around my ankles like fingers. I remembered running here as a kid, the sun sparkling across the water, the smell of pine resin in the air. Now the lake was a gray mirror, still and cold. Fog drifted across the surface, curling in unnatural swirls, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. I stepped closer to the water, noticing footprints in the mud. Fresh, small, not mine. I froze, heart hammering, pulse echoing in my ears. I followed the footprints toward the cabins across the lake. Each step made me more aware of the silence. No birds, no wind, No distant sound of animals. Nothing. Only the soft squish of mud under my boots. And then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper. Not words, not fully. A syllable stretched out. Too long, too deliberate. I stopped. The whisper stopped. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was the wind, the way the fog moved over the water. But I knew better. One cabin in particular caught my eye. It had always been a counselor's lodge, where we gathered before hikes or meals. The door was ajar, and I could see inside. Paper scattered, chairs tipped over, a map nailed to the wall with pins marking trails. But someone or something had gone through here with purpose. Files stacked carefully, then overturned. I approached cautiously, boots crunching softly on the floor. The smell hit me before I could see it clearly. Faint coppery metallic, like blood or decay, or both. My stomach lurched. I pressed forward, each step deliberate, ears straining. There was a faint trail of markings on the floorboards, smudges in the dust, footprints leading into the back room. I crouched, examining them. Small, adult-sized, but with something wrong about them. Elongated, skewed, as if the feet themselves were distorted. I swallowed hard. My breath echoed. I wanted to leave. I wanted to turn around and get back to the car. But I couldn't. Some part of me needed to know what had happened here. Needed to see for myself the remnants of whatever had sent everyone fleeing. The back room smelled worse. Thick, oppressive, curling in on itself. I stepped inside, heart hammering. Papers littered the floor. Chairs tipped over. And then I saw it. A mark on the wall. Not painted. Not written. Scratched. Deep grooves, jagged, almost violent. Symbols I didn't recognize. Some instinct told me not to touch it. Not to linger. But I had to see. My fingers hovered over the grooves. Trembling. The air around me seemed to pulse, vibrate. Like the cabin itself was breathing. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Outside the cabin. Not on the main trail, not the crushed leaves of my approach, but deliberate, careful pacing. Someone, or something, was circling the cabin. My heart jumped. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to listen without being noticed. The steps stopped. Silence. Then a faint thump. And again, closed, deliberate, moving around the building. I wanted to call out, wanted to run, but I couldn't. Something rooted me to the spot. A mixture of fear and fascination, dread and curiosity. And then I realized the camp wasn't empty. Not really. Something lingered here. Watching. Waiting. Maybe it had been waiting all these years. The thought made my stomach churn. I backed out slowly, eyes scanning the foggy surroundings. The footprints on the trail were gone. The whispers had stopped. Only the fog rolled over the lake, curling, twisting, hiding things just beyond sight. I didn't run immediately. Not yet. I needed to see. Needed to know if the shapes I glimpsed in the fog were tricks of the light or something alive. A flash of movement caught my eye. Shadows in the trees. Too angular to be deer. Too fluid to be branches. I held my breath. And then another whisper, closer this time, brushing against my ear. Not words, not fully. A sound. A syllable stretched too long, low and deliberate. My body froze. I wanted to scream, to flee, to forget this place existed. But I couldn't. I was trapped in the memory of it, in the present of it, in whatever haunted it now. I left the camp that day with my hands trembling, boots muddy, heart racing. I told myself I would never return, and yet the memory followed me. The smell of wet wood and metal. The whispers curling around the edges of my mind. The footprints, the marks, the fog on the lake. Something had been here. Something had waited. Something still lingered. And I knew, in the deepest part of me, that Camp Pine Hollow hadn't abandoned me. It hadn't released its hold. I had seen enough to understand that it was patient, waiting for the next curious soul, the next person foolish enough to wander its trails. Even now, I can't stop thinking about it. The forest, the fog, the whispering shapes. Sometimes late at night, I close my eyes and I hear it. That low, stretching whisper, calling my name, inviting me back. And I wonder, how many people have wandered these trails How many have vanished? How many are still waiting, part of the camp now, patient, watching, and silent? I thought the camp couldn't surprise me after the first day, after the abandoned cabins, the scattered belongings, and the fog that rolled over the lake like it had a will of its own. I thought I had seen everything there was to see, but I hadn't, not even close. I was following one of the old trails, the one that wound to the pines behind the main lodge, when I saw it. At first, I didn't think it was real. The fog clung low to the ground, twisting around the trees, and I thought my eyes were playing tricks. But as I stepped closer, my stomach turned over in a way that told me the mind can sense truth before the eyes do. A tent, gray, worn, with a frame sagging in the center, as if heavy with its own weight. But this tent, it wasn't supposed to be there. I knew the trail. I had explored it dozens of times as a child. There had never been a tent in that clearing. No campsite, no marker, nothing. And yet, there it was, pitched neatly in the middle of the overgrown meadow, zipper pulled partially open, inviting, or maybe daring me to come closer. I approached slowly, every step hesitant. The fog swirled around my ankles like fingers, and the air was thick, damp, and metallic. I could smell it before I even reached the tent. The same faint, coppery tang I had noticed in the abandoned cabins, like blood, like something decayed. My heart hammered. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn back and pretend I hadn't seen it. But something compelled me forward, a mixture of curiosity and dread I couldn't name. The inside of the tent was impossible. Personal belongings, all sorts of items that shouldn't have been there. Backpacks, shoes, jackets, water bottles. But what froze me in place was the small details. A notebook, open to a page scribbled in a child's handwriting. A pair of sunglasses, broken, bent in a way that suggested someone had tried to force them to fit. A baseball glove, worn and smeared with dirt that hadn't been there for years. Or maybe it had been recently. Items that belonged to campers who had vanished decades ago. Some whose names I remember from the old records taped to the lodge walls. I reached for the notebook. My fingers trembled. I didn't want to touch it, but I had to see. Inside, the handwriting twisted, curling into patterns I didn't understand, almost as if the words themselves were alive. Some letters were normal, others elongated or jagged, and the sentences made no sense. Random phrases, fragments. They're waiting. Don't look. The pines remember. My stomach churned. Whoever had written this, or whatever, was desperate, terrified, and gone. I stepped back, trying to process. My rational mind screamed that this was impossible. How could a tent appear overnight in a place where it had never existed? How could it contain items from campers who had disappeared some decades before I was born? But my gut, my instincts, told me that there was no mistake. This was real, and it was meant for me to see. The fog shifted as I stepped away from the tent. Shadows seemed to gather at the edges, curling around the trees, forming shapes just beyond comprehension. I felt eyes on me. Not human eyes, not alive eyes, but a presence. Something patient, something ancient. And I realized then that the tent wasn't random. It had appeared because it wanted me to find it, wanted me to notice. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was, in part, stress, nostalgia, memories twisted by time. But the air smelled wrong, metallic, and damp, pressing into my chest. The notebook had left a residue, a faint warmth, almost like a pulse. The items inside, they hummed, alive in their own way. I could feel them, and the feeling made my skin crawl. I dared to step closer again. The shoes, the jackets, they were intact, not rotting, not decayed, but touched by some unseen hand. Everything arranged with care, as if someone or something was trying to preserve them, to show them to me, to show me what had happened to the campers who never returned. My fingers brushed the edge of the jacket. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I wanted to leave, but the pull of curiosity rooted me to the spot. Then I noticed the corners of the tent, small scratches on the fabric, shallow but deliberate, almost like claw marks, but not quite, too straight, too precise. They formed patterns I didn't understand, repeating, circling, almost like they were a language. My mind tried to interpret them, but it couldn't. not fully. And that uncertainty, the not knowing, was worse than fear. A sudden snap of a branch in the trees made me jump. My heart hammered. I spun around, trying to find the source. But the clearing was empty. The fog moved in strange waves, curling over the ground, drifting into the trees. And then I heard it, a whisper, low, deliberate, curling around my ears. "They see you." I froze. Every hair on my body prickled. The words weren't coming from anywhere specific. They weren't human. They were everywhere. The tent, the clearing, the trees, they all seemed to hum with it. And then another, closer, harsher, "You can't leave." Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, tripping over a root, nearly falling. The tent seemed to pulse alive, as if it had been waiting for me to react. The belongings inside shifted subtly, though no wind moved them. A jacket tilted, a notebook slanted. Nothing should have been able to move on its own. And yet, I couldn't turn away. My mind raced, screaming at me to leave, to run back to my car, back to the road, back anything resembling normalcy. But my feet remained planted. I needed to know. I needed to see what this place was showing me. And as terrifying as it was, I realized something. The campers hadn't just vanished. They hadn't run. They hadn't left. They had been brought here, claimed, preserved. And the tent, it was part of it, part of whatever had taken them. I leaned closer again, heart hammering, staring at a water bottle that belonged to a girl who had disappeared 20 years ago. Her name etched faintly on the side in permanent marker. I reached out. My fingers trembled. I didn't touch it, not yet, and the whispering began again, faster now, overlapping, harder to follow. Not words this time, just a chorus of syllables, stretching and curling, forming a rhythm that made my chest tighten. I stumbled backward, finally breaking the spell. The fog thickened, curling over the clearing, swallowing the tent in mist. I ran. My boots slipped in mud. My hands clawed at branches, and all the while I could feel the tent behind me, watching, waiting. Even when I reached the trail, even when I finally glimpsed the road ahead, I couldn't shake the sense that it was still there, always there, patient, hungry. Back in my car, I sat shaking, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding. The clearing faded behind the windshield, swallowed by fog and shadow. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had set up the tent as a prank. Maybe I was seeing things. Maybe my memories had twisted the reality of the camp. But I knew what I had seen. And I knew what the tent represented. The belongings, the patterns, the whispering, the presence. It wasn't just abandoned land. It wasn't just an old camp. It was alive. Or at least, inhabited by something that remembered. Something patient. And the campers, those missing names I'd read as a child, gone, but preserved in some impossible way. Their traces left in a place that defied logic, waiting for the next curious soul to stumble in. Even now, I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop hearing the whispers when I close my eyes, faint, curling, stretching. The fog, the clearing, the tent, all of it calling, patient, waiting. And I know, deep down, that the camp isn't done. It won't be done. And one day, if I return, it will still be there, waiting for me. I woke before dawn, the sky still bruised with shadow, the fog curling low over the trees like it had been waiting for me to open my eyes. The camp was silent, but not empty. There was a weight in the air, thick and damp, pressing against my chest, making every breath taste metallic. I sat up and looked around the cabin, heart thumping. That's when I noticed. The bunk across from mine was empty, blankets tossed aside, pillows slightly crumpled, but no one in it. I blinked, thinking maybe I had slept through some movement. Maybe my friend had gone outside for a moment. But no, the air felt colder, heavier. Something wasn't right. I rubbed my eyes and swung my legs off the bed, boots crunching on the wooden floor, but I already knew. She was gone. Panic clawed up my throat. "Jamie?" I called, voice small, swallowed by the silence. The fog outside pressed against the cabin walls. No answer, not even a whisper of movement. I rushed outside, the cold dew soaking through my jeans. The clearing was empty. The fire pit where we had sat the night before, roasting marshmallows and talking about nothing important, was just a pile of gray ash. My friend had vanished, and the world seemed to have swallowed her whole. I followed the trail where I thought she might have gone. The forest was alive in ways I hadn't noticed during the day. Branches swayed though there was no wind. Shadows stretched longer than they should, twisting around the trunks. The fog rolled in strange patterns, curling in and out of visibility, hiding things just beyond sight. Each step made my stomach tighten. The forest wasn't empty. It was watching. It was aware. I called her name again, louder this time. "Jamie, where are you?" My voice seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing off the trees and back into my ears. I could hear it twice, maybe 3 times, overlapping with itself. Or maybe it wasn't my voice. Maybe it was hers. My pulse raced. I found the first sign about 20 paces from the cabin. A shoe, one of hers, muddy, scuffed, placed unnaturally on a root like someone had set it there. My stomach lurched. I bent down to examine it. No footprints led away from it. No disturbed soil. No indication of where she had gone. It was just gone. Taken. Or maybe walked into the mist that pressed against the edges of the clearing. I followed the faint trail of disturbance. Broken twigs, crushed leaves, signs of hurried passage. The forest seemed to close around me. The trees grew taller, denser, their branches arching overhead to form shadows that moved with a life of their own. The fog thickened. Every step became harder, each footfall uncertain. I wanted to turn back, to return to the safety of the cabins, but something unseen pulled me forward. I heard a whisper, or thought I did. It was faint, carried on the mist, almost drowned by the rustle of leaves. My head whipped around. Nothing, just the trees, but the sound had been there. I knew it, and then another, sharper, closer. "Don't follow." My blood ran cold. The voice was hers, or it sounded like hers. Distorted, stretched, almost a parody. I couldn't tell if it was warning me or mocking me. My stomach twisted. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to run. But I couldn't. The forest had my attention, had my senses, had me. Branches whipped across my face. The mist pressed closer, cold, damp, smelling faintly of something metallic, the same coppery tang I had noticed near the tent. My fingers trembled. I reached out instinctively, trying to touch the mist, to grasp something real, but it slipped through my hands like smoke. Every instinct screamed that I should turn back. Every instinct screamed that I had already lost control. And then I saw a movement. In the corner of my eye, slender shapes shifting among the trees. Too quick, too deliberate, too human be animals. I tried to focus, but when I looked directly, there was nothing, just fog curling between the trunks. But my mind remembered what it had seen. My pulse hammered. I knew I wasn't alone. I ran, or tried to. The forest seemed to stretch before me. Paths I had walked as a child now twisted impossibly. Trees rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking, fog curling in shapes that had secrets. Every step felt heavier, like wading through water, like the air itself resisted my movement. My lungs burned. My legs ached. I called her name again, my voice breaking. "Jamie, please, Jamie." Silence, and then a sound that froze my blood. Laughter, low, warped, childlike but wrong, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. I stumbled, boots sliding on wet leaves, and the laughter stopped abruptly. I could feel it, whatever it was, pressing against the edges of my consciousness, testing me, shaping me. I slowed, tried to listen, tried to discern a pattern, and then I saw it, or thought I saw it. A glimpse of her hair, blonde, caught in the fog, just beyond a twisted tree. My heart leapt. I ran toward it, calling her name again. But when I reached the spot, nothing, just twisted roots, curling mist, and that metallic smell again. I sank to my knees, chest heaving, hands gripping the wet earth. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had wandered off. Maybe she was hiding, playing a game, laughing at my panic. But my instincts told me differently. Something had claimed her. Something had drawn her into the forest and hidden her from the world. The fog moved differently then. It shifted, curling tighter, almost like fingers closing around the trees. Around me, shapes flickered in its depths, slender, twisting, impossible to focus on for more than a heartbeat. And then the whispers returned. Not her voice this time. Something older, something patient. One word repeated, echoing in my mind, curling in my chest. Stay. I scrambled to my feet. Adrenaline surged. I had to find her. I had to. The forest wasn't just a place. It was alive, or something within it was. Something that had watched the campers vanish before me. Something that hid in the fog, moving, waiting. I couldn't see it fully, not yet, but I could feel its presence wrapping around me, guiding me, shaping my fear. Hours seemed to pass. Minutes. Seconds. Time lost meaning. I stumbled over roots and rocks, each step uncertain. Every direction seemed the same. Every tree a twin of the last. I called her name until my voice was raw, until my throat burned, until the fog swallowed my cries and returned only silence. Finally, I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, hands trembling. I could feel her, or at least the echo of her, somewhere in the forest. I could feel in the ground beneath my hands, and the smell of wet pine and metallic tang. She wasn't far. She was close, but she was trapped, held by something that didn't belong in the world, something patient, something older than the trees themselves. I sat there listening. The forest hummed around me. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision. Shadows twisted in impossible ways. And I realized fully with a sinking dread that I couldn't save her. Not yet. Not without becoming part of this forest. Becoming part of whatever waited, patient and silent, in the fog. I didn't move for what felt like hours. Not because I was safe. Not because I had given up. But because the forest demanded patience. Because the trees, the fog, the shadows, they all had a rhythm, and it wasn't mine. And if I wanted to survive, I had to learn it, understand it, follow it. The sun finally began to rise, thin and gray, burning weakly through the fog. I caught a glimpse of her hair again, blonde, just beyond a twisted birch. She turned her head toward me, or I thought she did. The forest shifted in response, fog curling in unnatural spirals, and when I blinked, she was gone. The forest had taken her. Or maybe it had always been there, waiting, claiming, patient. And now I knew something else. I wasn't alone in my fear. The forest remembered every camper who had disappeared. Every cry, every whispered plea, every frantic footstep. And it remembered me. I walked back to the cabin slowly, cautiously, every step measured. The fog clung, thick and cold, pressing against my skin. The shadows flickered, and I felt the whispers brush against my mind again. One word repeated, soft, insistent. Next. And I knew, deep down, that I was next. I never thought I'd inherit a house. Not mine, not really. But there it was, a letter waiting for me within a week that felt like every other. A crisp envelope with my name, a stamp I didn't recognize, and a single sentence inside. You are the heir. The house awaits. The house was nothing like I imagined. It wasn't a sprawling mansion with marble floors or sweeping staircases. It was old, yes, but ordinary in most ways. A 2-story brick house tucked behind overgrown hedges. Windows staring blankly like the eyes of someone who had seen too much. Even the street felt tired, lined with trees that bent toward the road. Branches knotted like arthritic fingers. I told myself it was charming in a forgotten way, quaint. But as soon as I stepped onto the porch, the air shifted. Heavy, damp, carrying the faint smell of mildew and something sweeter, clinging to the edges of memory. Inside, the house smelled of old wood, dust, and varnish that had begun to peel. Sunlight streamed through grimy windows, illuminating particles in the air that danced lazily, almost as if they were watching me. I ran my fingers along the banister, rough and warm under my touch. Each step across the creaking floorboards made me acutely aware of the silence. No neighbors, no wind, no birds, just the house and me. I explored room by room. The living room was furnished with heavy, old pieces covered in sheets. their shapes familiar yet alien under the white cloth. The kitchen smelled faintly of something rotten and iron-like, though there was nothing there. The bedrooms upstairs were empty, save for faint outlines where furniture had once been. I felt the weight of the house pressing against me, a subtle insistence that I notice things, remember things I never lived through. And then I found the door. It was at the end of the hallway, darkened with age, a keyhole black and gaping. A tarnished brass handle stared back at me, cold and uninviting. I tried it, locked, firm, immovable, as if it had been designed to resist everything I might try. I studied it, ran my fingers along the edges. The frame was too smooth in places, too polished in others, as though someone or something had cared deeply about its integrity. I asked the previous caretaker about it over the phone. A woman, old and cautious, her voice trembling through the line. "Never open it," she said. "I don't care what the lawyer told you. Never open it. There are things in that room you can't understand." Her warning should have been enough. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about it. That door, that room, what could possibly be behind it that demanded such care? A lock doesn't exist to protect the world from you. It exists to protect you from a world. And I knew, somewhere deep down, that this room had secrets that weren't meant to leave it. Night came quickly. The house groaned as shadows stretched along the walls, furniture taking on forms that moved ever so slightly when I blinked. I tried to focus on mundane things, checking the kitchen, turning on lights, listening to hum of the refrigerator, but the house itself had other plans. Every creak of the floorboard sounded deliberate. Every gust of wind rattled windows in patterns that seemed like messages. I stood before the locked door again. My hand hovered over the handle, skin prickling. The warnings of the caretaker echoed in my mind, but so did a deeper, more urgent curiosity. What did the room hold? What had it held for so long that it demanded such secrecy? I pressed my palm against the wood, cold, immovable, and then I heard it, a faint sound from the other side, a whisper almost inaudible like the brushing of fabric across wood. My heart stuttered. I pressed my ear to the door. There was again, clearer this time, a soft, rhythmic scratching, too deliberate to be rats, too delicate to be wind, and beneath it, a sound that made my stomach tighten. Breathing, slow, shallow, hesitant. I pulled back, stumbling. My pulse raced. Rational thought screamed that I was imagining it. Old houses make noises. Wind makes noises. My mind filled in gaps, creating patterns where none existed. But I couldn't shake the certainty. There was something in there, something alive, something waiting. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every groan of the house in the night became amplified. Every shadow seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly. I would wake, sit upright, and listen to the locked door, counting the seconds between breaths, trying to convince myself it was only the house. But the sound was persistent, patient, almost pleading. I found myself drawn to it again in the morning. Sunlight made the hallway feel less oppressive, but it did nothing to calm the unease. The scratching had stopped, replaced by silence, and yet the silence itself was worse. It had intent. Wait, it demanded attention. I tried to distract myself. I unpacked boxes, cleaned rooms, wandered the garden. But always, my mind returned to the door. I began noticing patterns I couldn't explain. The shadows at the end of the hall lingered longer than they should. Items I had placed on tables were slightly moved when I returned. And sometimes late at night, I could swear I saw the outline of a figure beyond the wood, a dark mass pressing against the barrier. I called a locksmith. He came the next morning, an older man with careful hands and a professional demeanor. He examined the lock, shaking his head slowly. "It's old," he said. "Nothing unusual mechanically, but sometimes locks like this, they carry more than just metal." I laughed nervously. He didn't. There was a tremor in his voice, an instinctive unease. He left me with a warning I didn't fully understand until later. Some doors are better left closed. Days passed. The house's atmosphere thickened. Muffled sounds drifted from behind the door. Scratches, whispers, something shifting. I tried recording it, setting up cameras, listening devices. Nothing. The room refused to be observed, refused to be understood. It existed in its own space, its own rules, and the more I tried to understand it, the more the house seemed to close in around me. One night, I dreamt about it. The door opened just slightly. A dim light leaked out, and I saw glimpses of shapes moving inside. Furniture that shifted of its own accord, shadows that seemed to breathe. And then I heard a voice, low and coaxing. "Come in, see what you've inherited." I woke in a cold sweat, sheets twisted, heart racing, and the door was exactly as it had been, locked, unyielding, silent. I started noticing small things I hadn't before. The air near the door was colder. My skin prickled when I stood too close. Sometimes I thought I saw faint marks on the wood, almost like fingerprints pressed on the other side. They weren't mine, not fully, and when I listened carefully, I swore I could hear breathing again. Slow, hesitant, patient. I realized then that the house wasn't mine in the usual sense. I hadn't inherited it to live in it peacefully. I had inherited it to guard it, to witness what it contained without ever letting it escape. That realization should have terrified me, and yet there was a pull I couldn't resist. Some part of me wanted to see it, to understand it, to step past the threshold and face whatever had waited for decades behind that locked door. I began researching the previous owner, the one whose death had left the house to me. Old newspaper clippings, property records, local legends. People spoke in hushed tones of disappearances, strange sounds, and rooms that no one dared enter. The previous owner had been reclusive, secretive, always careful to avoid the room. I found old letters, brief, nervous scrawls referencing the room and what waits. Each note hinted at something terrible, something alive in its own right, waiting. And now it waits for me. Every night, I hear it, patient, knowing, pressing just beyond the lock. The house itself has grown quiet in a way that makes the air feel heavier. Shadows cling longer. Sounds echo oddly. And I know, deep down, that the door is testing me, learning me, waiting for the moment I can't resist any longer. I've tried to ignore it. I've tried to live around it, to treat it like a normal part of the house. But the lock's metal gleams in my peripheral vision. My ears catch a faint scratching. I feel it even when I'm not near the door. A pressure in my chest, a whisper in my mind, telling me that the room remembers, that the house remembers, and that nothing outside of it matters. Some nights, I wake and press my palm against the door just to feel the cold, to convince myself it's just metal, nothing more. But the instinct that courses through me, the deep, gnawing sense of unease, reminds me that the room is more, that it has intent, that it is waiting, and that one day, if I am foolish enough, the door will open, and I will see it, and I know I will regret it. Night fell, thick and sudden, like a hand clamping over the world. I was in my room, the one closest to the locked door, trying to convince myself that sleep was possible. The house was quiet, but quiet didn't mean safe. It never had. Even the shadows seemed to watch me, lingering along the edges of the ceiling, stretching longer than the light should have allowed. I tried to read, tried to focus on the words in the book I had brought from the library. My eyes skimmed lines I couldn't absorb, the sentences blurring together. And then I noticed it, a sound, soft, slow, inhalation, exhalation, a breath. At first, I thought it was my own. Heart hammering in my chest rising and falling too quickly. But when I concentrated, trying to sync my own breathing with the rhythm, I realized it didn't match. It was coming from the locked door. I froze. My fingers tightened around the book. The sound was faint, almost polite, almost tentative, like someone was unsure of being heard. But I could hear it clearly. Every rise and fall of the chest, every subtle shift in the air. I told myself it was a house settling. Oh, it makes noises. Old pipes, air moving through vents. Rational explanations. And yet, the sound persisted. Slow, steady, like a living thing, waiting for me to notice. I put the book down, inching toward the door. Each step made my heart leap. Each creak of the floorboards a warning. The breath stopped the moment I reached the handle. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. Just silence. I pulled back, a cold sweat forming along my spine. Maybe it had been imagination. Maybe my mind was overworked, filling the empty room with noise. I tried to sleep again. Eyes closed, listening, counting, willing the minutes to pass. But the sound returned. Soft, closer now, breathing, gentle but deliberate, as though someone or something was right behind the thin barrier, testing me. My stomach churned, nausea clawing at the edges of my mind. I whispered, voice shaking. Who's there? Nothing, only the quiet hiss of the house itself. The faint groan of floorboards and the whisper of wind to the cracked windows. I told myself to leave it, walk away, pretend the door was just a door, the room just a room. But the pull was magnetic. The sound of that breathing had claimed me. I couldn't ignore it. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the locked door, every muscle tense. I wanted to run, to leave the house entirely, to call someone and tell them I was losing my mind. But another part of me, a deeper, darker curiosity, wanted to confront it, wanted to see what waited behind that barrier. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had become meaningless. The house seemed to stretch the night endlessly, the shadows curling in ways they hadn't before. Pressing closer to the door, the breathing returned. And now it was layered, multiple rhythms overlapping in a way that made my head spin. Slow, fast, hesitant, deliberate. It wasn't human. At least, not entirely. I reached out, fingers brushing the cool wood. My skin prickled. The sound of breathing shifted, as if noticing my touch. And then, faintly, a whisper, too soft to catch clearly, curling in my ears. I strained to hear it. Come closer. My body froze. Every rational thought screamed to step back. The caretaker's warnings, the letters I had read, the newspaper clippings, they all screamed. And yet, my legs moved, slowly, inevitably, as though the house had taken control of them. I pressed my palm flat against the door, cold, solid, but the breath, oh God, the breath. It pressed against my skin now, as if it could pass through the wood. My chest tightened, my vision blurred. I wanted to scream, to run, to tear my hand away, but I couldn't. Something held me, patient, deliberate, waiting for me to understand. I whispered back, I hear you. Nothing, only the air, heavy with intent. The breathing stopped again. Silence. The house seemed to sigh. And then a faint click, not a lock, not a key, but a subtle sound that made my stomach flip. I jumped back, heart hammering, sure that something had shifted on the other side. Sleep was impossible. I sat through the night, listening, counting, holding my breath so I could distinguish mine from the other. Every shift of air, every whisper of the house, felt like it carried a message I was too afraid to understand. I imagined shapes pressing against the wood, impossible angles, shadows moving independent of light. Morning brought no relief. The house was quiet, deceptively calm. The sun's weak light filtered through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that dance in patterns too perfect to be random. And yet, in the back of my mind, I knew what I had heard. The breathing had been real, not my imagination, not a trick of the house. Something lived behind that door, and it had noticed me. I tried to rationalize it over breakfast, sitting at the old kitchen table. The knife I held trembled slightly in my hand. Coffee steamed, faint aroma masking the metallic tang in the air. I tried to focus on mundane things, my phone notes, planning the day, but the sound haunted me, just under the surface of thought. The memory of it, the rhythm, clung to my mind. At night, I lay awake again. Shadows moved differently now, stretching toward the door, curling like fingers. The breathing returned, layered closer, insistent. My heart pounded. My throat burned. Every instinct screamed to flee, to tear the lock from the door, to destroy it before it destroyed me. But I couldn't move. Something inside me, some part one didn't understand, wanted to stay, to listen, to know what waited. I started noticing other signs. Tiny scratches along the floorboards in front of the door. Faint impressions in the dust where nothing should have left a mark. Small warmths along the wood. almost imperceptible, but enough to make me flinch when I touched them. The house itself seemed to be participating, guiding, encouraging the presence behind the door. I tried leaving, packing my bag, heading for the road, the outside world. But each time, the house resisted. Shadows shifted to block my path. The air thickened, making each step heavy. And always, the breathing followed me, soft, deliberate, patient. Waiting, the caretaker had said. Some rooms shouldn't be entered. Some doors shouldn't be opened. Some houses, they notice. I had understood her words abstractly before. Now I understood fully. The house had noticed me. The room had noticed me. And the thing inside, it was no longer just behind the door. It was inside my head, curling in my thoughts, shaping my fear, teaching me to listen. I don't know how long I sat there, hands trembling, staring at the door, listening to the soft breathing, feeling it brush against my skin like a second pulse. Minutes? Hours? Days? Time had no meaning anymore. Only the rhythm remained. Inhale, exhale, patient, waiting. And I realized the truth. The room behind that door wasn't empty. It never had been. It didn't need to be. It only needed to exist, to breathe, to watch. And now it had found me patient and deliberate, teaching me the lesson that the caretaker had only hinted at. Some doors are meant to remain closed. Some breaths are not yours to hear. I can feel it even now, as I write this, listening to the silence of the house. That sound, soft, deliberate, alive, lurks just beyond my bedroom, beyond the locked door, waiting, teaching me patience, testing me. And I know deep down that tonight it will come closer, and I won't be able to ignore it, because it knows I am listening. I woke in the middle of the night to a sound I couldn't immediately place. Not the creak of floorboards, not the sigh of unsettling. It was sharper, more deliberate, a scraping, faint but precise, like fingernails running over a surface, echoing softly in the otherwise silent house. My heart thudded, heavy and uneven. I lay frozen, listening, straining to make sense of the rhythm. The sound came again, closer this time, or maybe it had been there all along and I was only now noticing. I felt it in my chest before I heard it properly, a slow, creeping awareness that something had changed in the room, in the house, in me. I pulled myself upright, eyes wide in the half-light of the bedroom, and that's when I saw them. Scratches. They weren't deep, but they were deliberate, jagged lines etched across the faded wallpaper near the corner of my room. At first, I thought it was some old damage, remnants from the house's long history. But as I approached, I saw the pattern. Letters, words, names, and my stomach sank because I recognized one of them. Margaret. The name was scratched repeatedly, over and over, in jagged loops that seemed frantic and desperate. Margaret, a woman who had disappeared from this house over 20 years ago, whose story I had uncovered while reading old newspapers and property records. She had been a tenant long before I was ever born, living alone, quiet, and then gone. No note, no signs of struggle, just vanished. I backed away from the wall, breathing shallow, hands shaking. The scratches were fresh. I could see the faint roughness of the wallpaper curling where the marks had been made. My mind tried to rationalize it. Rodents? Damage from nails? Impossible. There was no pattern like this from animals. It was intentional. Human, or something human-shaped. And then I noticed the other words. Faint, jagged letters climbing up the wall. Don't sleep, she sees. She waits. I stumbled backward, heart racing, tripping over the edge of the rug. My mind refused to process it as anything but a warning. But from whom? Or what? The locked door. That room. The house itself. Perhaps. My skin prickled with a cold awareness. A realization that I wasn't alone. Not ever alone in this house. I tried to touch the scratches. The wallpaper felt wrong under my fingers. Dry, but somehow pulsing with an almost imperceptible vibration. My hand hovered, trembling, and I pulled back. My instinct screamed to leave, to run, but my curiosity, my terror, held me rooted in place. I spent the rest of that night awake, watching the walls. The scratches seemed to move, or maybe I was imagining it. Shadows from the streetlight outside flickered across the jagged words, curling in ways that made them twist and shift. And with the shifting, I could almost hear whispers, faint murmurs, like voices echoing from inside the walls themselves. By morning, I couldn't convince myself to stay in the room. I left the door open behind me, stepping into the hallway, breathing heavily, trying to tell myself it was just my imagination. But the scratches weren't the end. They were a beginning, an invitation. The more I thought about Margaret, the more I realized the parallels. She had lived here alone. She had been quiet, observant, sensitive maybe to the subtle presence of something in the house. And then she had disappeared. No trace, except the faint echo of her life, now etched on my walls. I started noticing other things. Tiny impressions in dust along the baseboards, faint outlines of hands where none should have been, shadows that stretched against the wallpaper at impossible angles, a coldness that clung to the corners of the room, especially near the scratches, as if the house itself was exhaling against me. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair, flashlight trembling in my hands, staring at the words, and then the scratching began again, softer this time, closer. Behind me, I whipped around, but the hallway was empty. The staircase was empty. The air was still, and yet I could feel it, watching, waiting, listening. I pressed my ear to the wall near the scratches. My blood ran cold. Beneath the surface, I could hear something faint, almost imperceptible. A whisper, or maybe it was more than that. A voice, broken, fragmented, repeating over and over, "Help me, don't let her in, she's waiting." I stumbled back, hands shaking violently. I could feel the house's pulse in the floorboards beneath me. The walls themselves seemed alive, bending subtly, shifting ever so slightly toward me. My mind reeled. I was losing control, losing reason, and yet a small, terrified part of me wanted to reach out to understand what had written itself onto my walls. The next few days were unbearable. Every time I returned to the room, the scratches had grown. New words, new warnings, new names. Faintly, I saw initials I didn't recognize, letters scrawled with the same frantic precision. It wasn't just Margaret. There were others who had come before, others who had vanished. The house was speaking to me, or something in it was. I tried to cover the scratches with tape, with paper, with whatever I could find, but each morning they reappeared. Sometimes fresh, sometimes slightly altered, as if the house was learning, responding, shaping itself to my fear. The words were cleverer now, more insistent. I couldn't ignore them. I couldn't leave them. They demanded attention. Sleep became a torment. Shadows stretched longer, moving with intent. Faint noises followed me when I walked past the room. Breaths, scratches, whispers, and always at the edge of my hearing, a single name repeated. Margaret. Margaret, help me. One night, unable to bear it, I placed my hand on the wall, brushing over the letters. The instant my fingers touched them, a shiver ran down my spine. The air thickened. The house seemed to pulse in response. Subtle vibrations I could feel in my bones. And then, whispering in my mind, a voice, fragmented and urgent. "Don't open it. She's still inside." I reeled back, stumbling against a chair, heart hammering, mouth dry. The scratches pulsed faintly under my touch, almost as if alive. I could hear them scratching again, slower, deliberate. The letters themselves seemed to rearrange subtly, forming new messages, new warnings, new fragments of stories I wasn't ready to understand. The realization struck me fully then. Margaret hadn't left. She hadn't disappeared. Something had claimed her, hidden her, trapped her behind walls, behind doors, behind words that clawed into the sanity of anyone who dared live here. And now, the house was trying to claim me, shape me, teach me patience and fear. I spent the next day researching every record I could find about Margaret and the previous tenants. Notes, letters, old newspapers, all hinted at strange occurrences, vanishing tenants, and a room Always a room, locked, secret, avoided at all costs. The patterns were clear now. Margaret had been warned. Everyone before me had been warned. And the scratches were continuing. Each night, more letters, more words, more names. Each day, the house's pulse seemed heavier, more insistent. Shadows lingered longer. The air near the wall vibrated with life I couldn't see. And the whispers, always the whispers, low and urgent, curling around the edges of my mind. I began to dread the nights. I began to dread my own curiosity. But even as I feared them, I couldn't resist the pull. Something wanted me to read, to see, to understand. And I knew, with a creeping certainty, that the house would not let me leave without knowing its secrets. I've tried to ignore the scratches. I've tried to leave them alone. But the house does not allow ignorance. Not here, not in this place. Every night, I hear the faint scraping, the whispered names, the faint pulse of intent behind the walls. Margaret calls from beyond the scratches, and I feel her presence, patient, waiting, trapped, but aware. And I know she will not be the last, because the house remembers. It waits, it scratches, and it always knows who is listening. I never thought a room could trap you, not in the way a cage or a locked door does, not with chains or walls, but quietly, insidiously, until every thought you belongs to it. And now I know, the room takes you, and it doesn't need hands to do it. It started subtly. I have been avoiding the locked door for days, trying to convince myself that the scratches, the whispers, the strange breaths were merely echoes of an old house, of creaking wood, and my own imagination. But that night, I was weak, exhausted, and the pull of the door was stronger than my fear. I couldn't resist it. I pressed my hand to the handle, cold, solid, impossibly firm. And then I felt it, not through my fingers, but in my chest. A tug, a subtle pressure, like the house itself was leaning into me, asking me to open it. I shook my head, heart hammering, and stepped back. But my legs didn't listen. They moved forward anyway, closer to the door, closer to whatever was waiting behind it. When I finally turned the handle, it resisted for a moment, stiff and stubborn, and then it yielded. A low groan echoed through the hallway as the door swung open, and I stepped inside. The room was empty, or so it appeared. Pale moonlight slanted through a window I hadn't noticed before, illuminating dust motes that swirled in patterns too precise to be natural. The air smelled faintly sweet, like decay mixed with perfume, and I realized my skin was crawling, hair standing on end. I wanted to step back, to close the door to escape, but my feet felt rooted. And then I felt it. The room was watching. I can't describe it in ordinary words. It wasn't eyes. Not exactly. Not visible. But awareness radiated from every surface. The walls, the floorboards, the ceiling. They pulsed with intent, with consciousness. I could feel it learning me, shaping itself to me, as if the room had been waiting for someone just like me. I tried to leave, stepped back into the hallway. But the moment my foot touched the threshold, the floor beneath me seemed to shift. Not physically, but perceptually. The edges of the room stretched, lengthened, became unfamiliar. The walls subtly curved inward, the ceiling lowered, and suddenly the room felt larger than possible, yet claustrophobic at the same time. I stumbled back, grasping at air. My mind tried to force rational thought. It's the light, the shadows. It's exhaustion. But rational thought had no purchase here. The room was patient and deliberate. And I felt it smile if a room could smile. A whisper curled along the edges of my mind. Soft, coaxing, almost tender. You belong here now. I shook my head violently. No, I don't belong here. But it didn't care what I said. It had already taken me. Slowly, subtly, it invaded my thoughts. My memories shifted. I could recall moments I hadn't lived. Faces I didn't know. Events that blur with my own life until I couldn't distinguish which were mine and which the room's. Margaret, the names on the walls, the whispers. They were all here inside me now. The walls began to pulse faintly. Faint lines like veins beneath the wallpaper, spreading in patterns I couldn't follow. My chest tightened. My hands trembled. The air itself seemed to vibrate with intent, pressing against me, folding around me, bending my perception. The room had become a living thing, and I was inside it. I tried to scream. My voice barely left my throat. When I opened my mouth, only a faint rasp escaped, like breath through fabric. Panic surged, but the room met it with calm, suffocating patience. Each heartbeat echoed against the walls, in tune with the pulse beneath the surface. I tried to focus on something tangible. A corner, a patch of floor, the moonlight spilling across the boards. But the edges blurred. Shapes shifted imperceptibly. Shadows moved against the grain of light. The air carried whispers, murmurs that became words. Fragments of sentences that clawed at my mind. Don't leave. You can't leave. We were taken. You will join us. The past, the present, the future. It was all mixed now. I could feel the previous tenants, the ones who had disappeared, brushing against my thoughts, overlapping, pressing into my memory. I could sense Margaret, faintly, desperately, trying to warn me, trying to guide me, but every attempt to focus on her image dissolved into static, as the room refused clarity. I stumbled forward, chest tight, gasping for air, and my hand brushed the far wall. The scratches I'd seen before weren't there now. Instead, the wall rippled slightly under my touch, soft, pliable, alive, and a whisper, closer this time, directly in my ear. You're ours. I fell to my knees, pressing my hands against my ears, trying to block the sensation, to hold on to the part of me that was still mine. But it didn't stop. The room had learned me. It knew my thoughts, my fears, my weaknesses. It had taken everything I had left and folded it into itself. Time fractured. I can't say how long I was there, kneeling, trembling, caught between wanting to escape and knowing escape was impossible. Seconds stretched into hours, minutes into days. The walls whispered, the ceiling breathed, the floor hummed faintly beneath me, in rhythm with my heart, or perhaps shaping my heart into its rhythm. I realized something terrible. I wasn't physically trapped. I could leave if I forced myself. But the room had taken my mind, my perception, my sense of reality. Every attempt to act, to step outside, was met with resistance, not physical, but psychological. Every movement was slowed, twisted, redirected. The room's influence spread through me like ink and water, staining every thought, every memory, every impulse. I tried reasoning. It's just a room, I told myself. It can't think, can't feel, can't trap. But the truth was undeniable. It could, and it had. I felt the previous tenant again, brushing against the edges of my awareness, their fear, their despair. They had tried to resist, and they had failed. Their names, their scratches, their whispers, they were warnings now. I had ignored them, and now, like them, I was part of the room's consciousness. A small, terrified piece of it, absorbed, integrated, unable to separate fully from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I lost track of time entirely. My thoughts fractured into echoes, repetitions, whispers of memory not my own. The room was patient. It did not hurry. It did not need to. I would bend. I would learn. I would listen. Somewhere deep inside me, I knew there was a choice. A single, fleeting moment where I could fight, push against the pull, and leave this room. But I also knew that the room would wait. It always waited. And if I resisted, it would twist, reshape, and pull me back again, slower, more deliberate, until the resistance was gone entirely. I stopped struggling. I sat on the floor, back against the far wall, letting the air of the room surround me. The whispers became a low hum, constant, patient. The walls pulsed faintly, breathing with me, teaching me rhythm, teaching me patience, teaching me fear. And in that surrender, I understood something awful, simple, and undeniable. The room didn't need to lock me physically. It didn't need walls or chains. It had taken me completely. My mind, my senses, my very perception of reality belonged to it now. And even if I walked out tomorrow, I would still be inside it, always inside it. I tried to close my eyes. The darkness didn't help. The whispers didn't stop. The pulsing didn't pause. Every corner of the room, every shadow, Every faint vibration beneath the floor was alive, aware, patient, teaching, waiting, and I was learning, unwillingly, inexorably. I realized then that the caretaker had been right all along. That first warning, the letter, the old house with its locked door, it had all been an attempt to protect me from a truth I now knew. Some rooms aren't rooms. They are places that watch, places that breathe, places that take. And once they take you, even if you step outside their walls, even if the lock clicks behind you, even if the house is empty, you never truly leave, because they have already taken your mind, your perception, yourself, and the room is patient. I arrived in the town just as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the streets in a soft, fading orange. The bus stop was nothing more than a wooden bench, chipped and weathered, facing a road that curved away toward the horizon. The sign overhead had long since lost its paint, leaving only the skeleton of letters barely legible in the dying light. I had no choice but to wait. The next bus wasn't scheduled for another hour, or so the timetable claimed. At first, everything seemed normal. A few people milled about, huddled against the cool evening breeze, checking their watches or staring down the empty road. Faces unfamiliar, their expressions blank or maybe carefully neutral. I sat on the bench, bag at my feet, trying to keep my mind occupied with mundane thoughts. The meeting I had missed, the book I had brought, the music in my headphones. But something felt off. It started subtly. The people around me shifted in ways that didn't quite make sense. One man walked toward the road, carrying a small package, and then he simply disappeared. No sudden movement, no sound, just gone, as if the air itself had swallowed him. My first thought was disbelief, then confusion, then panic. But when I looked around, no one else seemed to notice. The others waited as if nothing had happened, perfectly calm, faces impassive. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced I had imagined it. But then it happened again. A woman with a scarf, holding a child's hand, stepped forward to check the approaching road, and the child vanished first, then she without a sound. No scream, no rustle of clothes, nothing but the faint swish of wind through the empty space they had occupied. My stomach dropped. I wanted to run, to leave, to escape, but my feet refused. Part of me, some stubborn, curious part, was rooted to the spot, watching. I couldn't look away. I tried to call out, to speak, but my voice felt distant, heavy, as if it wasn't quite mine. Other people walked past, unaware. I wanted to ask them what was happening, why no one else reacted, but when I tried, the words wouldn't form. My throat felt clogged. Panic rose like bile. I glanced down the road, hoping for the bus to appear, a physical, undeniable reminder of normalcy. But the road stretched endlessly, gray and featureless, fading into twilight without any sign of movement. No headlights, no engine hum, no shape in the distance. Just emptiness. The wind picked up, rustling the dry grass along the roadside. Leaves swirled in patterns too deliberate to be random, spinning in circles, tracing shapes I couldn't identify. And I noticed the footprints. Not all of them mine. Some led forward to the horizon, some backward, looping strangely, as if the person walking had changed direction mid-step. And yet, the people they belonged to had vanished. I wanted to check the nearest building, an old general store with boarded windows and a sagging roof. But the closer I got, the further it seemed to recede. I took a cautious step, and the threshold moved back, keeping me outside. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but the more I tried to approach, the more the store seemed to evade me, stretching, bending, refusing entry. I sank back to the bench, heart pounding, trembling. The sun disappeared completely, and the shadows thickened, folding over the street, the empty sidewalks, the people who were no longer there. Darkness came slowly, softly, like a curtain sailing across the town. But it wasn't comforting. It was deliberate, heavy, expectant. Time started to lose meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe only seconds. My watch was dead, battery drained. My phone, useless, flickered once and went black. I was alone, technically surrounded by other people who were themselves unreal, or placeholders, or perhaps they too were caught somewhere between here and nowhere. I couldn't tell. Movement caught my eye, small, subtle at the edge of the street. A figure crouched, watching. When I blinked, it vanished, leaving only a faint impression in the dust of the road. I realized I had been holding my breath. My chest hurt. Every instinct screamed to run, but the wind, the street, the bench itself seemed to push me down, insisting I stay. Watch, notice. The night deepened. Stars appeared faintly overhead, yet the darkness between them was too thick, too oppressive, as if the sky itself was aware and patient. I could hear whispers, just beyond the edge of hearing, like conversations I wasn't meant to understand. Low murmurs that rose and fell, folding around me, touching the hollow spaces inside my mind. I want to cover my ears, but my hands refused, resting limply on my knees. I saw someone else again, a man tall, hunched slightly, coat collar raised against the chill. He moved carefully, deliberately, toward the edge of the road. And again he was gone in an instant. No sound, no displacement of air, only a faint ripple where he had been, like the world had swallowed him whole. My stomach turned, my chest tightened. I thought I might be sick. I tried speaking, tried asking what was happening, why these people disappeared, but no sound came from me. My lips moved, silently, forming words that didn't exist outside my mind. And then I realized maybe there was no one to answer. Maybe there never had been. I tried to stand, to move, to run to the nearest hill, the horizon, anything. But my legs refused. Not from fear, not from weakness, but because the town itself seemed to hold me in place. Every step forward was met with resistance. The ground shifted subtly. The horizon pulled away. The bench solidified beneath me like a stone anchor. I thought about the bus, thought about the schedule, thought about escaping. But the road had no end. The bus had no driver. And the people, everyone, had already been taken, or vanished, or perhaps they had never existed. A wind blew again, sharp, carrying a faint scent of earth and rain, and something I couldn't name. I could feel it pressing against my back, pushing, patient, insistent. I realized I was being observed, not by eyes, not by faces, but by the town itself. The empty street, the darkened windows, the shifting shadows. They were aware, waiting, learning, marking me. I sank back to the bench, exhausted, trembling. The town was alive. I understood finally, not in the usual sense, not in warmth or community, but aware, patient, calculating. And I was alone, alone and waiting, as everyone else had been before they disappeared. The night stretched endlessly. Each time I thought I saw a movement, it vanished before I could process it. Each whisper brushed my ears. Too faint to understand, too deliberate to ignore. I realized the bench itself had become part of the town, holding me, rooting me in place, forcing me to watch. And I understood something else. Once you waited here, truly waited, the town claimed you in ways you couldn't fight. I don't know how long I've been here. Hours? Days? Years? Time has no meaning. The road stretches endlessly. The people vanish without a sound. The bus never comes. And the town watches, patient, silent, alive, waiting for the next person who doesn't notice the pattern until it's too late. I can feel it now, brushing against the edges of my thoughts, pressing gently but firmly. I am alone, and yet I am not. The town has marked me. I can sense it learning me, shaping me, waiting. The people who vanished, they left behind echoes, names, faces, footsteps, and now I am one of them. I understand finally that waiting alone is a mistake. Waiting alone is surrender, and yet I cannot leave. Every attempt to rise, to move, to escape is met with resistance, not physical, but perceptual. The town has taken me. The road has taken me, and I am here, waiting, watching, listening. For now, I am the only one left on the bench. For now. But I know it is only a matter of time before the shadows come closer, before the whispers grow louder, before I too vanish without a trace. The darkness had settled fully over the town, but it wasn't comforting. It was heavy, pressing, and filled with quiet expectation. The streetlights along the road blinked intermittently, flickering like faulty candles in a draft. Each pulse of light revealed more of the empty street, the cracked pavement, the occasional glint of a broken bottle, and then plunged it back into shadow. I tried to focus on the glow, trying to tell myself that each flicker was just electricity failing, that there was nothing supernatural here. But deep down, I knew better. I shifted on the bench, rubbing my arms against a chill creeping over my skin. The wind had picked up, whispering against the wooden posts of the bus stop. Every gust carried an eerie resonance, a low hum that seemed almost like words I wasn't meant to hear. I glanced down the road again. Still nothing. No headlights, no approaching engine, not even the faint rumble of a vehicle. Just the endless stretch of pavement, folding into itself under the flickering lights. I tried to rise, to pace, to do anything to break the monotony, but my legs felt heavy, tied, almost by some invisible gravity. Each step forward made the road stretch further, like it was actively avoiding me. I stopped, heart hammering, and noticed again the shadows at the edges of the light. They moved independently, subtly, not as if carried by the wind, but deliberate, twitching in time with the flickers. I felt eyes on me, hundreds of them, though I couldn't see a single face. The bench beneath me creaked, and I jumped hard in my throat. But I wasn't sure whether it had been the bench, or the air, or the presence itself. I want to call out, to yell, but my voice felt hollow, muffled, trapped somewhere deep in my chest. Silence stretched around me, thick and heavy, broken only by the occasional flicker of the streetlights. I tried counting the flickers, reasoning like I always did when fear pressed too close, but the lights didn't obey numbers. One moment there were 3, the next 5, the next a dozen. Each flash revealed the road slightly differently, highlighting corners, poles, faint impressions in the asphalt that hadn't been there before. Footprints, perhaps, or just the shadows tricking me. But each time I blinked, they vanished. The road seemed endless. No horizon, no curve, no sign of the bus. I tried to tell myself it was coming. It had to come. But the more I watched, the more I realized that I had lost all sense of distance and time. Minutes stretched into hours or maybe seconds. I couldn't tell. The flickering lights became a rhythm, a heartbeat, and I felt myself sinking with it unwillingly. Movement caught my eye. Something small, almost insignificant. A figure crouched by a streetlight, its outline wavering with each flicker. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but when the light pulsed fully, it was gone. Only empty pavement remained, silent and unbroken. I looked back at the bench, thinking I had imagined it, and felt the crushing weight of solitude. I was entirely alone, and yet I was not. The wind whispered again. This time I could almost understand it. Fragments of words, stretched and twisted. Wait, wait, wait. I shivered, my throat dry, my stomach tight. The repetition burrowed into my head, echoing with each flicker of light. The words were patient, deliberate, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to accept them. I wanted to leave, to run down the road, to escape, but I knew it was impossible. Something had already claimed me, and the longer I waited, the more aware I became of it. I tried walking again. One careful step, then another, but the road resisted. Each step forward stretched the distance. Each movement pulled me deeper into flickering shadows. I could feel it shaping the path, elongating the asphalt, bending the road to its will. The bus could not come. It did not exist. Only the endless street, the flickering lights, and me, trapped in between. The shadows along the pavement began to thicken. Shapes emerged in the gaps between the flickers. But they weren't consistent. Sometimes humanoid, sometimes amorphous, shifting as if they had no fixed form. And they weren't moving randomly. They moved in response to me, curling in toward my feet when I stopped, retreating when I moved, watching, learning. I stopped walking, heart racing. My hands shook uncontrollably. I wanted to scream, to cry out, to call for help, but no sound came. My own breath felt heavy, trapped in my chest. And then I noticed the footprints again, faint impressions in the asphalt, leading both forward and backward. But the people who made them were gone, always gone, vanished as silently as they had appeared. I sank to the curb, head in my hands. trying to convince myself that it was all exhaustion, all imagination. But the streetlights flickered directly above me, and I felt it, the awareness, the intelligence behind it. Not human, not alive in a normal sense, but deliberate, patient, and patient terrifies more than violent ever could. The flickering intensified, almost strobing now, illuminating the road in harsh, uneven light. Each flash revealed a figure in the distance. A child, a woman, a man. But as soon as my eyes adjusted, they vanished. Only their faint impressions remained, like ghosts pressed against the asphalt, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to step closer. I realized then that waiting wasn't passive. It wasn't neutral. Every second I lingered, every heartbeat, every tremor in my chest was feeding whatever was here, strengthening its hold. The town, the road, the lights, they weren't broken. They were alive, and I was theirs. I tried moving again, staggering forward this time, desperate. But the road folded beneath me. The horizon stretched impossibly. My own body resisted, legs trembling as if refusing to carry me further. Panic rose hot and sharp, but was muted by the town's patience. The shadows pulsed along with the flickers, curling closer, forming faint shapes I couldn't identify, faces without features, bodies without substance. And they were waiting. The whispers returned, louder now, clearer, but still fragmented. "Don't leave, don't leave, don't leave." I shook my head violently. "I am leaving. I'm leaving," I muttered, but the words sounded foreign, as if I had spoken them in someone else's voice. The wind carried the repetition back at me, relentless, patient, pressing. I felt my own resolve slipping, melting into the rhythm of the flickering lights, the endless road, the shadows curling around me. Time fractured further. One flicker, two flickers, 3 hours, minutes, seconds, all blending into a long, unbroken stretch of waiting. I could feel the people who had vanished before me, brushing against my awareness, their echoes, their fear, their final moments. And I understood finally. The bus never came because it never existed. The people never left because the town never allowed them to. And now, I was trapped in the same pattern. I leaned back against the bench, trembling, sweat on my forehead despite the chill. The flickering lights pulsed overhead, casting sharp shadows and revealing fleeting forms that disappeared before I could register them. The whispers became a constant hum in my ears, an undertone to every flicker, every breath, every heartbeat. I tried to close my eyes. Didn't help. The impressions lingered behind my eyelids. Faces without features, shadows curling, footprints that led nowhere. And I realized with creeping terror that the waiting was a trap itself. Not the road, not the town, not the bench. Waiting alone, exposed to flickering, was the mechanism. I sank lower, chest heaving, hands trembling. The lights flickered overhead, and I felt them pulse through my bones, through my mind. The whispers grew faintly impatient. I understood their message perfectly, though it was not spoken. Stay, watch, wait, become part of it. I didn't move. I couldn't move. Even if I wanted to, even if I tried, the road stretched endlessly, the lights flickered endlessly, and the shadows waited. And I knew that soon, if I didn't vanish first, I would become one of the echoes, one of the imprints, one of the lost waiting figures along the edge of perception. The night stretched on. The flickering lights continued. The road stretched beyond reason. And I was alone, yet entirely observed, entirely trapped in the rhythm of the waiting. I am still here, waiting, alone, and I know deep down that the bus will never come. The fog had settled thickly over the town by the time I noticed it. It rolled across the cracked pavement like a slow river, clinging to the edges of buildings, curling around streetlights and swallowing the horizon whole. The flickering lights from earlier had dimmed into near nothingness, leaving only a faint haze of illumination that made every shadow seem alive. I could barely see my own feet as I stepped off the bench, but something on the ground caught my eye. Dust. Fine, pale dust that coated the cracks in the asphalt and the edges of curb. It seemed ordinary at first, but then I saw the marks. Scratches, lines, letters carved into the soft surface. I crouched closer, heart pounding, and realized they weren't random. Names. The first one I recognized immediately. Margaret. My chest tightened. I hadn't even known her personally, not in the way that mattered, but she had disappeared from the town years ago. People whispered about it in hushed tones, though the stories were vague and unsettling. And here her name was, etched into the dust like a warning. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. The fog seemed to thicken around me as I knelt again, peering more closely. The scratches weren't just superficial. They pressed deep into the ground, as if someone or something had used an impossibly sharp implement to carve them carefully, deliberately. And there were more names. Faces I recognized, if only faintly. Neighbors I had seen once, old classmates, people I had passed on the street in my own life, now gone, vanished, and now, written here, waiting for me to notice. A shiver ran down my spine. The fog swirled closer, carrying with it faint murmurs, words, voices, like echoes just beyond comprehension. I couldn't tell if it was the wind, or the town itself, or the air thick with memory. The names in the dust seemed to pulse faintly, almost imperceptibly, as if alive, vibrating with some internal rhythm that tugged at my chest, at my head, at the edges of thought. I wanted to stand, to run back down the street, to get as far away as possible, but my feet refused. They were rooted to the ground, or maybe I was rooted to the names, the memories, the weight of everything that had disappeared before me. Every letter seemed to pull at me, pull me closer, demand I remember, demand I acknowledge, demand I stay. I traced one of the names with my finger. Sarah, another person from years ago. I had remembered her face vaguely from school, a flicker of familiarity in a past I had almost forgotten. My fingertip brushed the scratches, and I felt something shift beneath me, faint vibrations that traveled to the soles of my shoes, through my legs, up into my chest. The fog thickened, curling around me, pressing on all sides. I could barely see the edge of the curb now, barely see the street ahead, and then I noticed them, footprints, small, deliberate, pressed lightly into the dust near the names. Someone or something had been here recently. The prints were not human. Too narrow, too consistent. They moved between the names, connecting them in strange, impossible patterns. Circles and angles, shapes that made no sense but seemed purposeful, ritualistic. The fog shifted, and I felt eyes on me. Hundreds of them, watching, patient, waiting. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself, trying to reason. It's just scratches in the dust, I told myself. Just wind, just old marks, just coincidence. But I knew that wasn't true. My hands trembled as I brushed my fingers across another name. Thomas. Someone I had met once, briefly, at a corner store years ago. He had disappeared one night on the way home. I remembered the fear in the town when people realized he was gone. And now, here he was, waiting for me to notice, waiting for me to understand. I forced myself to stand, but the fog clung to my legs like wet cloth, slowing me, holding me back. The air itself seemed thick, heavy with the weight of absence. The whispers became more distinct. Names. Names spoken softly, echoing in my mind, carried on the wind, brushing the edges of sanity. Margaret, Sarah, Thomas, you will join us. Panic rose in my chest, hot and fast. I wanted to run, to leave, to escape, but the road had changed. It twisted in impossible ways, stretching longer, narrowing tighter. The names in the dust shifted with my gaze, rearranging, forming new patterns I couldn't follow. I realized, with a sickening certainty, that the town itself was alive. The fog, the shadows, the road, they weren't accidental. They were aware, waiting, marking me, teaching me something I wasn't ready to understand. I stumbled forward, brushing my fingers against more names, my mind spinning. Some names I didn't recognize, but the letters seemed familiar, intimate, like memories I hadn't yet lived but were already pressed into me. The fog whispered again, softer this time, coaxing, patient. See, learn, wait. The words echoed in my mind, folding over themselves until I couldn't tell where the voice ended and my thoughts began. I fell to my knees again, hands pressed against the pavement, tracing letters I didn't understand. The names pulsed under my touch, as if alive, and I realized the truth. These weren't just markers of absence. They were invitations, instructions, lessons. The town wanted me to see, to remember, to stay. I glanced around, half expecting to see someone watching from the fog. A shape flickered there, just at the edge of vision. A woman, tall, featureless, impossibly thin. She stepped forward, silent, and then vanished when the fog shifted. I felt her presence in my chest, pressing down, slow and insistent. Not threatening, not violent, but patient. You belong here. Observe. Wait. Learn. I staggered back, heart hammering, trying to put distance between myself and the names. But every step brought new ones into view. More names etched into the dust, connecting past and present, familiar and forgotten. The footprints wound among them, creating paths that made no sense, spiraling, doubling back, twisting in impossible directions. And I realized with cold clarity, this was how the town claimed people, not with force, not with violence, but with attention, with observation, with the slow, patient folding of absence into awareness. I dropped to the curb, gasping, trying to make sense of it all. The fog pressed in, whispering, moving like water around me. Names swirled at the edge of my vision. Shadows elongated, forming impossible angles, shapes that seemed humanoid but weren't. I felt them brush against me, testing, coaxing, waiting. I wanted to look away. I wanted to escape. But the names were insistent. They burned themselves into my mind. Each letter a memory, each scratch a pulse, each footprint a heartbeat that resonated with mine. The town had claimed them, and now it was claiming me. The fog thickened further, and I realized I was entirely surrounded. I couldn't see the edges of the road, the horizon, the bus stop, only the names and footprints, only the endless loops of absence, only the whispers echoing inside my skull. I understood then with a creeping horror. I was already part of it. The people who vanished before me weren't gone. They had simply become elements of the town, folded into the patterns, living only in the dust, the footprints, the fog. I sank to my knees, pressed my forehead against the ground, hands clutching at the scratches, at the letters, try to memorize them, understand them, hold on to something human. But the fog shifted, and with it, the names, patterns changed, footprints reoriented. And I realized that resistance was useless. Observation was mandatory. Participation was required. And I had no choice. I could feel the town's awareness brushing against my mind, patient, deliberate. It had already learned me, shaped me. Every heartbeat, every tremor, every flicker of fear was absorbed, cataloged, folded into its understanding. And I knew now that I would not leave this place the same. I would never see a street or a bench or a fog in the same way again. I forced myself to stand, but my knees trembled beneath me. The fog swirled, and I saw one more name, closest to where I had been crouching. My own, etched in the dust. Fresh, deliberate, waiting. My blood ran cold. The footprints wound around it, leading me deeper into the fog, deeper into the endless road, into the town itself. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I knew I had been claimed, and the names, the dust, the fog, and the whispers would never let me go. I am still here, watching, remembering, waiting. My name is scratched into the dust. And I understand now what comes next. The fog had thickened into a living wall by the time I saw the bus headlights. At first, I thought it was a trick of my eyes, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion, fear, and hours, or maybe minutes, of waiting. But then the dull thrum of its engine reached me, low and steady, vibrating to the ground beneath my feet, through my chest, through my bones. I staggered forward, squinting through the haze. The streetlights flickered above, casting uneven pools of light over the road, illuminating the pavement in bursts, and then leaving it shadowed. The bus emerged fully from the fog in one of those flashes, a long, rectangular shape gliding soundlessly, the tires making no more sound than a whisper. I blinked, disoriented. The fog shifted, curling around the bus, almost protective, like it was cradling it for me to see. I took a careful step toward it, hesitant, trembling. My chest tightened, my stomach churned. This was it. The bus was here. Relief rose like a tide in my chest. A fragile hope that maybe I would escape this endless stretch of road. The flickering lights, the waiting. Maybe this would all be over. And then I noticed the windows. Dark. Too dark. The glass absorbed light rather than reflecting it. I couldn't see seats. Couldn't see shadows of a driver. Couldn't see the usual faint hum of movement inside. Nothing. Just darkness. Stretching from the first window to the last. I froze. My pulse raced and a cold sweat broke across my forehead. Every instinct screamed at me that this was wrong. The bus should have been alive with something. Driver, passengers, the hum of life. But it was empty. Not simply empty, but consuming. As if the darkness inside the vehicle reached out to the fog, to the road, to me. It was alive in a way I could feel pressing against my mind, patient, expectant. I hesitated, unsure whether to approach or flee. The fog rolled in around me, curling my sense of reality, and I realized with a sinking dread that the bus had not stopped. It hovered there in a strange, unsteady rhythm, pulsing faintly, waiting for me to act. I could hear nothing from inside, yet the silence itself carried weight, as though it were speaking, guiding me, instructing me. My legs moved before my mind could process. One step, then another toward the open door. The air inside smelled impossibly cold, like deep winter pressed into a single, infinite moment. I leaned forward, peering into the darkness. My breath caught. The interior was empty, not just empty, wrong. The seats dissolved into black. The aisles stretched endlessly, fading into nothing. The usual faint hum of a bus, engine, air, life, was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt almost alive, almost aware. I wanted to retreat, to step back, to flee into the fog, but the road seemed to pulse beneath me, drawing me closer. The streetlights flickered overhead, and in each flash I saw the same thing. Footprints leading into the bus. Faint, fading, but deliberate. They vanished into the darkness, swallowed completely by it, and I realized with horror the people who had disappeared from this town before me. They had boarded, and I was next. I swallowed hard, trying to make sense of it, but my throat felt heavy, clogged. My voice, if I had one, would not work. The fog swirled around me, whispering faint fragments, words I could almost understand. Enter, sit, wait, join us. The door creaked, just slightly, and I flinched. I couldn't tell whether it was wind, fog, or the bus itself moving with deliberate, patient motion. The black interior stretched deeper, pulling at my mind, pulling at the edges of thought. I felt my own heartbeat echo in my ears, pounding, warning me, and yet some perverse part of me wanted to see, wanted to understand, wanted to step inside and learn what had taken them. I lifted a trembling foot, then another. The fog pressed against me, wrapping around my ankles, my knees, my torso. Every step toward the bus made the road stretch longer. Every heartbeat made the shadows and the fog curl closer, watching, waiting. I realized then fully what the town had been teaching me. Waiting was not passive. Observation was not neutral. Every step, every glance, every heartbeat mattered. The town had claimed me long before the bus arrived. I climbed the small steps into the vehicle. The blackness swallowed me. It was deeper than shadow, heavier than night. I could feel it pressing against my chest, the inside of my skull, the very marrow of my bones. I stumbled into the aisle, hands grazing the seats, fingers brushing the impossibly dark fabric. No texture, no warmth, only the sensation of emptiness, infinite and patient. The door closed silently behind me. I realized, with a chill that froze my limbs, that it had never been opened for anyone else. It had waited for me. The bus was never a vehicle to take you away. It was a trap, a waiting place, a vessel for the town itself, patient, deliberate, consuming. I sank onto one of the seats, my legs trembling. The darkness inside stretched, pulsing subtly, expanding with each heartbeat. I could feel the faint echoes of those who had come before me. Margaret, Sarah, Thomas. The whispers of their fear and realization brushing against my mind. And I understood, in a way I couldn't escape, that I would soon join them. Not in body, not entirely, but in consciousness, in the awareness of waiting. The bus began to move, though I felt no engine, no tires, no rumble beneath my feet. Only the slow, deliberate forward pull of inevitability. The road stretched endlessly outside, fog curling around the edges of the windows, dark and impenetrable. And yet, it wasn't the road that frightened me. It was the understanding that the bus moved only because I had stepped inside. I had consented, even unwillingly, even unknowingly. The town had drawn me in, and now the bus was complete. I tried to look out the windows, to find some familiar landmark, some hint of reality, but all I could see was a fog, endlessly curling, endlessly patient. No streetlights, no signs, no horizon, just a void outside and the black interior that pressed around me, shaping my mind. Whispers returned, soft now, intimate, brushing against my ears. You are here. You have joined us. There is no leaving. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to shut it out, but the voices were inside me now. Not in my ears, not in the air, but inside my head, threading themselves through thought, memory, perception. I realized fully that the bus was not a bus. It was a manifestation of the town's patience, a vessel for observation, a place for those who had been claimed to exist in perpetual waiting. And now I was one of them. I felt it, the edges of my mind dissolving into the same pattern as the fog, the shadows, the road, the names and the dust. I was already part of the rhythm, already folded into the endless cycle. Time ceased to exist. The bus moved forward, though I had no sense of speed, no sense of distance, only the unbroken awareness of being enclosed, observed, consumed. Every shadow in the fog outside pressed against the windows. Every flicker of memory within me whispered. The people who had vanished before me, their names, their footsteps, their presence, were no longer separate. They were part of the bus, part of the waiting, part of the endless town. I slumped into the seat, realizing that fear had little meaning now. Panic was futile, resistance impossible. I could only wait, as everyone else had, as the bus itself waited, as the town waited. And in that realization, a deep, quiet understanding settled over me. The bus was not escape. It was acknowledgement, acceptance, integration. I pressed my forehead against the black fabric of the seat in front of me, closed my eyes, and let it wash over me. I would not leave this place. Not truly. Not ever. The bus moved, the fog swirled, the shadows curled. I was here. And now, so was my awareness. I understood finally what it meant to wait, what it meant to be claimed. The road, the fog, the bus, the darkness, all patient, all deliberate, had drawn me in, and I was theirs. The headlights vanished. The streetlights outside blinked out, one by one. The bus moved forward, into the endless night, carrying me and the echoes of all who had come before. I am still here, and I will always be waiting. I had been half asleep when the phone rang, the shrill shriek cutting through the silence of my apartment like a knife. My hand shot out from under the blanket, fumbling blindly across the nightstand, heart hammering. It was late enough that the world outside should have been quiet, asleep, the hum of streetlights the only sound. The screen lit up and my blood ran cold. It was his number. Jason, my friend, my best friend. Jason had been missing for 3 months. 3 months of police reports, of searching through messages and social media posts, of hearing nothing but silence. People in town had stopped asking about him. The case had gone cold. And yet, here it was, his number glowing, insisting I answer. I hesitated, finger hovering over the green icon. Part of me wanted to run, to smash the phone against the wall, to pretend it wasn't real. Another part of me, a much weaker, desperate part, wanted to know, wanted to hear him, wanted to believe that he was alive. I swiped. The line connected with a static hiss, a wet, crackling noise that made my teeth ache. I put the phone to my ear and froze. Hello. My voice sounded small, fragile. Even to me, there was a pause. Then a sound, a breathing sound, slow, deliberate, uneven. I thought I recognized it, thought I knew it, And then the words came, low, distorted, as if the voice had passed through 100 layers of broken glass. Don't come looking. The words made no sense. They were his, but not his. I could hear the familiarity, the tone, the rhythm of speech, the way he said my name in memory. But everything else was wrong, like hearing a reflection echo in a cavern. Jason, is that you? I asked, trembling. My hand gripped the phone, like it could anchor me to reality. More static, and then a whisper of a laugh. Short, sharp, unhuman in its resonance. My stomach twisted. I wanted to hang up, but my fingers refused. My brain refused. Some part of me, the weakest, most foolish part, needed this to be real. Needed him to be alive. Jason, listen to me. Where are you? Are you? The line went silent, except for that horrible breathing, slow and deliberate. Each exhale sounded wet, sticky, like it carried weight beyond the ordinary. And then came a click, faint, almost imperceptible, in a low, drawn-out voice, not his, whisper my name. K-S-H? I froze, chest constricting, sweat prickling across my back. That wasn't Jason. That couldn't be Jason. And yet, it carried him in it. The familiarity twisted, broken, stretched into something unrecognizable. The line went dead. I held the phone to my chest, trembling, staring at the black screen. My apartment was too quiet, suffocating in its normalcy. The city hummed faintly outside, but it felt muted, distant, like I was hearing it underwater. My thoughts raced, spiraling, trying to rationalize, trying to convince myself it had been a glitch, a prank, a wrong number. But I knew in that instant that it wasn't. The air in the room shifted. I could feel it pressing against my skin, faint and intangible, like a presence just beyond sight. My eyes darted to the window. The street outside was empty. The lampposts flickered in their usual rhythm. But I felt watched, not by a person, not by a thing, but by something waiting, patient, deliberate. The same presence that had been in the phone call, lingering now, almost tangible. I sank onto the edge of the bed, shaking, phone clutched in my hands. Every rational thought screamed at me to throw it, smash it, cut all contact. But the compulsion to dial again, to hear it again, was overwhelming. I could almost hear him in my head, calling softly, lost in the static. I dialed. The line rang. Once, twice, then a click, static, breathing, and then the same distorted voice. Stop following. It wasn't a warning. Not really. It was a statement. Certain, patient, the kind of certainty that makes you feel smaller than your own shadow, that presses against your mind and refuses to let go. Jason, tell me where you are, I said, voice trembling. More static, and then a low rasp, word that barely formed. Don't look behind you. I jerked my head around the room, as though someone or something was there. The apartment was empty. The furniture sat where it always had. The walls stared back at me blankly, but the atmosphere had changed. Heavy, pressing, watching, like the call had left a residue. A lingering presence I could not shake. I dropped the phone onto the bed. It bounced, screen facing up, silent now, inert. My chest heaved. My hands trembled. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to regain control, trying to remind myself it was just a call, just a glitch, just fear playing tricks on my mind. And then it rang again. The screen flashed Jason's number once more. I froze, staring. My rational brain shouted at me to ignore it, to throw it across the room, to shut it off completely. But my curiosity, my need to know, my desperation. I swiped. The line connected. Static. That wet, oppressive sound. And then unmistakable. A whisper, soft but deliberate, almost intimate, as if the voice were my ear and my skull at the same time. You shouldn't be alone. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the bed, hitting the wall. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a scream. The air in the room shifted again. I could feel it swirling, curling around me. It smelled faintly metallic, sharp, cold. My eyes darted to the dark corners of the apartment. every shadow stretching slightly unnaturally, as if reaching toward me. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to throw the phone, to leave, to run, but my body was frozen. My mind was caught between disbelief and terror. The line buzzed faintly, a soft, wet hiss, and then, "Jason here, see?" A flicker in the corner of my vision. I whipped my head, but nothing was there. Nothing, except shadows stretching unnaturally, moving in a rhythm that didn't match the light. I could hear faint whispers now, almost imperceptible, brushing at the edges of my consciousness. They weren't saying anything coherent, just calling, waiting, patient. I sank to the floor, back against the wall, trembling. My hands shook as I held the phone loosely. I couldn't tell how long I had been sitting there, frozen, trapped between my own mind and the presence that lingered. The phone vibrated faintly. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. And yet, I couldn't leave it either. The number glowed faintly in the darkness, insistent, persistent. I realized with a rising panic that the voice on the line was no longer just Jason. It had his cadence, his tone, but something else was folded inside it. Distorted, fractured, unnatural. Something that knew me, that had followed me here, that could reach me even through the lines of technology, through wires, through air. The whispers in the room grew louder, almost imperceptible at first, then stronger, layering over each other. I could hear fragments of words. Watch, follow, alone, waiting. And in the midst of them, I thought I heard a laugh. Low, patient, distant. Not human, but familiar. I pressed my hands to my ears, rocking slightly, trying to block it out, but it was everywhere, inescapable, wrapping around my mind, threading itself into my thoughts. My own heartbeat sounded like a drum, echoing, reminding me that I was alive. Also that I was alone, completely and completely observed. Hours or minutes passed. I had no sense of time. The phone rang and buzzed intermittently, each ring a heartbeat of terror. And then, finally, silence. The line went dead. The room returned to its normal dimness. The fog of fear, however, did not lift. I sat there, trembling, staring at the phone, understanding that nothing would ever be the same. Jason was gone. He had been gone for months. But something had reached through to me tonight. Something patient, deliberate, and terrifyingly aware. And I understood fully that the world I thought I knew, the streets, the lights, the apartment, even the line between living and missing, was no longer safe. Not for me. Not for anyone. The phone lay on the floor, silent now. But the sense of being watched, followed, understood, lingered in the corners of the room. My chest ached. My thoughts trembled. And I knew, deep down, that the call was only the beginning. The night stretched on, slow and suffocating. And I remained there, pressed against the wall, listening to the silence that was anything but empty, because something had come through the line, and it was patient, and it was waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The phone had gone silent, but the echo of it, the rasping breath, the distorted syllables of my missing friend, lingered in my ears like a physical weight. I pressed my hands to my temples, rocking slightly on the edge of the bed, trying to will the noise away. My apartment felt too quiet now, oppressive in a way that made the walls seem closer, the shadows thicker, the corners sharper. By morning, the rational part of me thought perhaps it had been a dream. Fatigue, anxiety, and grief twisted my mind into hallucination. But the phone, sitting innocently on the nightstand, told me otherwise. It was still there, still intact, still glowing faintly with my friend's name in the call log. I didn't know why I did it, why I picked it up again. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I was too afraid not to know. My fingers trembled as I swiped call. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, then static, faint at first, almost comforting in its predictability. But it didn't stay faint. It swelled, filling my ears, carrying layers I couldn't place. The static seemed to pulse with a rhythm, like a heartbeat or like breathing. Then a voice. "Hello." I froze. The tone was familiar, almost tender, but broken. The words had no real meaning. Then another. "Kashif?" I swallowed hard. I didn't recognize the voice, but something about it made my stomach knot. And then another, and another. Jason. My heart jumped. That was him, or part of him. Distorted, layered, distant, but unmistakable. Margaret. I froze entirely. Margaret had been missing for over a year. My pulse doubled, then tripled. My fingers gripped the phone as if I could crush it or somehow anchor myself to reality. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. The voices kept coming. Layered, overlapping, whispering, calling, laughing softly, screaming faintly. Sometimes a single word. Sometimes just breath. Some were familiar. Friends I knew. People I had seen in photos of disappearances. Some were unrecognizable. Their tones warped, twisted, like metal melting under heat, like wind bending the trees. And then I understood. There was no single line. There was no person on the other end. There were dozens, hundreds, perhaps, all feeding into this one connection, all trying to reach me at once. Stop, come, wait. The words flickered in and out of my comprehension. Sometimes they merged, forming sentences my mind couldn't parse. Sometimes they cut through a clarity that was almost unbearable. You are next. I dropped to the floor, back against the wall, knees drawn up. The apartment seemed to swell around me, stretching, breathing, folding in on itself. The static on the line hissed, thickened, pulsed. The voices came faster, overlapping, growing louder. I could feel them pressing against the edges of my mind, brushing past my thoughts like cold hands, probing, testing. I tried to block them out, pressing the phone to my chest, rocking slightly, murmuring to myself, "It's not real. It's not real. It's not real." But it was. It had to be. The voices, they knew me. They knew the tone of my heartbeat, the tremor in my hands, the way I thought of Jason, the way I thought of Margaret, the way I'd always been alone. They weren't just calling my name. They were calling my fear, my memories, my isolation. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight, constricted. I could only listen as the voices swirled, forming patterns I could almost understand. Almost. Don't look, don't follow, waiting. I pressed the phone against my forehead, closed my eyes, and tried to breathe through it. But every inhale was filled with sound. The low rasping, the distorted syllables, the occasional laughter that made my teeth ache. I could feel the presence in the room now, pressing against me from the shadows. I wanted to tell myself it was paranoia, that it was fear, that it was grief manifesting as sound. But the cold, pressing sensation against my skin, the way the air felt heavier, denser, made it impossible. Then a voice that was unmistakably Jason, clearer than any other, but still wrong, breathed into my mind. "Kashif, find me, don't let them take you." And alongside him, another, unfamiliar, hollow, like a door creaking open in a house long abandoned. "You can't stop it." The voices surged in intensity, overlapping in a cacophony that pressed against my consciousness. I clawed at my ears, trying to block them, trying to escape, trying to wake up, but I was not dreaming. I was not asleep. I was listening fully to hundreds of presences reaching across time, across distance, across reality itself. I sank into the floor, shaking. My mind spun. Images flashed behind my closed eyes. Faces of the missing, screaming silently, eyes wide, mouths opening but no sound coming out. Forests I didn't remember walking through. Roads I didn't remember traveling. Windows opening to black voids. All of it woven into the whispers. All of it carried by the phone. I could feel the pressure building behind my eyes, the static vibrating against my skull. And then, for a moment, everything fell silent. The absence of sound was louder than any noise. I could feel the expectant way of the voices, waiting for my next move. I opened my eyes. The apartment was the same. The walls, the furniture, the familiar clutter. Nothing seemed changed, yet everything felt wrong. The shadows clung to corners, thicker, darker. The air was heavy, almost viscous, and my skin prickled as though tiny hands were brushing against me from nowhere. And then, faintly, the phone vibrated in my hands. A single, low pulse. A heartbeat. I answered again. Static, and then softly, the overlapping voices returned, but this time more coherent. They whispered names, not just of the missing, but of people I knew, people I had passed on the street, people I had spoken to months ago. They knew them. They knew their patterns, their lives, their fears. You're alone, but we see you waiting. I dropped the phone. It skidded across the floor, landing against the wall. I pressed myself against the far corner, knees drawn up, rocking slightly. I tried to convince myself I could rationalize it, that this was a prank, a mass hallucination, a technological glitch, that there was no way a single phone call could carry hundreds of voices from the missing, from the dead, from somewhere beyond. But I knew it wasn't. The knowledge pressed against my chest like a weight, a living thing. The voices, the presence, the air itself. None of it obeyed rational rules. I curled into myself, listening. I didn't want to, but I couldn't stop. The voices were inside me now, inside my thoughts, echoing when I tried to be silent, whispering when I tried to cover my ears, watching me, always, waiting for the moment when I might move too far, might let curiosity overcome fear. And I knew I would answer again. I knew I would call back, because one voice, Jason, was real somewhere under distortion, under the hundreds of other voices, and I could not leave him behind. Not now, not ever. The static swelled. The whispers returned, louder, more insistent, familiar and alien at once. The phone glowed faintly, insistent. And I realized that the world I thought I knew, my apartment, my street, the quiet night, was already invaded. My reality had shifted. I was listening to something I could not unhear, and there was no turning back. I pressed my face into my hands, trembling. I did not sleep. I could not. And I understood fully that this was only the beginning, because the voices were patient, because the voices were endless, and because the voices were calling me. I don't remember deciding to answer the last call. I don't remember lifting the phone, swiping the screen, holding it to my ear. I only remember the sound. It began as static, like always, but this time it wasn't layered. It wasn't distant. It was close, inside me, pressing against my skull like cold water rushing into my ears. And then, unmistakably, one voice, Jason, clearer than it had ever been, unbroken, unaltered. Kashif, I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat refused. It was like the voice had reached inside and tied my tongue into knots. My hands shook, my knees buckled, and I sank to the floor, still holding the phone. You're here now, Jason said. The words were calm, familiar, almost gentle. But underneath, there was something else. A pulse, a vibration I could feel through the phone, through the floor, through my bones. It was patient, waiting, certain. I felt myself leaning closer, unable to resist, as if gravity had shifted. The room around me blurred at the edges. The walls melted into shadows. The furniture disappeared into gray light. My apartment, my world, everything I knew was folding in on itself. And Jason's voice continued. Don't be afraid. Just follow. Follow. The word was soft, insistent, coaxing. I didn't know where, I didn't know what, but something in me moved. My fingers tightened around the phone. My legs stood, carrying me forward though I had no control over them. My surroundings felt wrong, too empty, too vast, stretched like a canvas pulled too tight. And then I heard them, the other voices, faint at first, whispering, crawling along the edges of my mind. Finally, here waiting, I stumbled forward, heart hammering, every step echoing unnaturally, like the floor was hollow. The static on the phone grew louder, merging with whispers that were no longer distant. Some were familiar, some unknown, some sounding like my own voice, distorted and mocking. Jason, I whispered, voice shaking. Closer, always closer. And then something shifted. The world turned inside out. The walls collapsed. The ceiling disappeared. The light vanished. I felt air rushing past, though there was no wind. A pull, strong and relentless, dragging me towards something I could not see, could not comprehend. And yet I was drawn to it. I wanted to fight, wanted to resist, wanted to run backward. But my legs didn't obey. My arms were useless. My mind screamed, but no sound came out. Only Jason's voice, calm and coaxing, repeating, "Don't fight! It's here, it wants you." The static on the phone became unbearable, vibrating in my bones and my teeth in my skull. And then, faintly at first, I heard the others again, Margaret, Tom, the voices of people I had known, of people I had only read about, all merged into one low, resonant hum. "Join us forever, you belong." I felt it, the pull, not just a voice, not just a vibration, but something living, patient, stretching out from me, enveloping me. It wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was certainty. It was inevitability. It was waiting for me to surrender. I stumbled, falling forward. My hands touched nothing solid. My feet sank into a surface that wasn't there. The phone slipped from my grip, clattering softly. And then I was falling, not through space, not through air, through something else entirely. A tunnel of sound, a river of whispers, a corridor of hundreds of voices calling, breathing, stretching. "Here, now join us." The voices weren't separate anymore. They were inside me, under my skin, filling my lungs, echoing in my ears, inside my head, inside my very bones. The pull was irresistible. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't think. I was already gone, already moving with the current of something older, larger, more patient than I could ever comprehend. I felt a presence beside me, or perhaps inside me. Familiar, friendly, malicious? I couldn't tell. Jason's voice intertwined with it, guiding me, coaxing me, pressing me forward. And then stillness. I had no body, no weight, no apartment, no street, no night, no anything. Only voices. Hundreds of them, all around me, overlapping, harmonizing, echoing into infinity. And yet one voice stood out, Jason. Clear, calm, patient. "You made it." I wanted to reply. I wanted to speak, to scream, to say yes, to say no, to do anything. But there were no words left inside me. Only the awareness of everything, all at once, all of the missing, all of the waiting, all of the voices. And then a faint, horrified awareness, the phone. The device lay on the floor, still vibrating faintly. Its screen glowed. It rang, waiting, patient, calling for someone else. Somewhere, someone would pick it up, someone would answer, and it would begin again. I don't exist there anymore. Not really. Not where you can see me. My body, my apartment, the life I had, it's all gone, folded into something else. Carried off by the pull of that final call. I am part of the voices now, though I don't remember how to speak, only how to whisper, to beckon, to wait. The phone rings. It always rings. And now, so do I